Chapter 4262. Day after day passed and the situation on Reincarnation Island quickly stabilized. Of course, the entire Reincarnation Island was in a state of excitement and celebration. It would probably take a long time for it to calm down. After all, Reincarnation Island had a new master, and Ji Tianxing had issued a series of new policies and orders. The 18 domain lords and many ancient clans, as well as the commanders and leaders of various forces, were ordered to carry out various tasks and carry out reforms. The biggest beneficiaries were naturally the billions of people. They were excited and emotional and they worshipped Kenshin to the extreme. After the situation stabilized, countless people gathered spontaneously and destroyed the statues of the god of the underworld in various cities. Even the statues of Commander Styx and Marshal Blood Prison were destroyed into dregs. Then the people spontaneously built Kenshin pavilions and erected beautiful and majestic statues of Kenshin for everyone to worship. In the past, the people were oppressed. Many of the people of other races were slaves who had to work all day long to mine and seize cultivation resources. They had no freedom. Every once in a while they had to worship the statues of the god of the underworld and pray. All of this was forced. Everyone's hearts were filled with disgust and resistance. Therefore, when destroying the statues of the god of the underworld, the people worked harder than anyone else. They built Kenshin pavilions and erected Kenshin statues of their own free will. That came from the bottom of their hearts. They were truly grateful to the sword god for saving them and giving them freedom and peace. Even if they went to Kenshin pavilions and worshipped Kenshin, it was out of their own free will and sincerity. There was absolutely no coercion. In this way, the billions of people's worship, gratitude and faith toward Kenshin were the most sincere and strongest. Ji Tianxing had always been overseeing the Netherworld Divine Palace in Yudu and didn't personally check the situation on Reincarnation Island. However, he could sense every day that Kenshin pavilions were built one after another. Countless people worshipped and expressed their respect, worship and gratitude toward him. It was a very mysterious feeling. The feelings of respect and worship of all living beings gathered into an invisible power of faith. It was transformed by the heavenly Tao and transmitted to Ji Tianxing. Under the support of the power of faith, he did nothing every day and his strength steadily increased. Of course, this wasn't the first time this had happened. Half a year ago, after he saved the boundless heaven continent, this situation occurred. In this half a year, even if he wasn't in the continent, he could sense that the people there worshipped his statues every day. His strength was also constantly increasing. There was no limit and there was no bottleneck. This was also the reason why the 5 great god emperors had forced the common people to build divine statues and worship them after they had taken over the god realm. This was because this method of increasing one's strength was indeed much faster and easier than cultivating. A month passed in the blink of an eye. 80 to 90% of the various decrees and policies. The Reincarnation Islands gradually calmed down. Everything seemed to have returned to normal. The Reincarnation Island, which had not been ravaged by war, looked no different from before. However, there was one difference that was very obvious. The Reincarnation Island today was full of joy, relaxation and freedom. Whether it was in the bustling city, the streets or the countryside, the people were all smiling. They felt happy from the bottom of their hearts. In the past 1,000 years, there were many slaves working in countless mines, herb mountains, beast gardens, and other places where resources were plundered. The atmosphere was heavy and oppressive. Now all the slaves were gone. They were restored to the status of commoners, gaining freedom and a new life. The places where resources were plundered were controlled by the domain chiefs' manors, the empires and many forces under their control. They carried out controlled, planned and arranged mining. Ji Tianxing understood that abolishing slavery and stopping the plundering of cultivation resources couldn't be overdone. Since hundreds of millions of people wanted to cultivate, the mining of cultivation resources still had to be carried out. Otherwise, it would be difficult to maintain the lives and cultivation of hundreds of millions of gods. But they couldn't endlessly, greedily and crazily plunder cultivation resources like before. That would only make the god realm more and more barren and eventually weaken and destroy. Only by mining cultivation resources properly and in a planned manner could those cultivation resources have enough time to regenerate. If they could control and balance it reasonably, they could go on for a long time, and the resources would never dry up. The god realm would also not fall and be destroyed. Of course, there were many similar rules and systems that involved all aspects. There were more than tens of thousands of them. No matter how resourceful Ji Tianxing was, it was difficult for him to take care of all aspects. He could only propose the main ideas and framework, which were supplemented and perfected by the various domain chiefs, ancient clans and forces and experts under their command. Even if there were any problems, those experts would report to him and propose various solutions for him to decide. In short, the Reincarnation Island was completely under his control. There were no worries. Thus, it was time for him to leave. Nangong Ni Huang, Nangong Ao, Yuchipu, Lon Kai, and the others had already rushed to the Netherworld Divine Palace to meet him. During this time he had thought carefully and decided on his next destination. The Reincarnation Island was located in the middle of the God Realm. Northeast, across the endless sky sea he would reach the Qianquan continent. Southeast, across the vast sky sea he would reach the chaotic continent. Southwest of the Reincarnation Island, across the stormy seas, he would reach the firmament continent. Ji Tianxing believed that the rulers and people of these three continents must have heard the news and knew that he had conquered the boundless heaven continent and the Reincarnation Island. At this moment the rulers of the three continents must be anxious and alert. They must be deploying troops and setting up defenses. As for the billions of people, most of them were looking forward to his arrival as soon as possible. Ji Tianxing also planned to end the battle quickly and conquer these three continents as soon as possible to control the entire God Realm. After all, the 5 God Emperors could not leave and return to the God Realm to deal with him. But the longer he delayed, the more variables there would be. Thus, he had already planned his future course of action in his mind. First, he would conquer the firmament continent to the southwest of the Reincarnation Island, then conquer the chaotic continent to the southeast, and finally attack the Qianquan continent to the northeast. This route just happened to circle around the God Realm, so it would not waste time. After making up his mind, Ji Tianxing held a meeting in the Netherworld Divine Palace early in the morning. He gathered the chiefs of the 5 ancient clans, the commander and deputy commander of the Imperial Guards, the city guard governor of Yudu City, and more than 20 god generals, chiefs and sect masters. Together with the 18 region masters, these people were Ji Tianxing's subordinates, the highest authority of the Reincarnation Island. Unfortunately, the 18 region masters were scattered and needed 10 days to reach Yudu, so Ji Tianxing did not gather them. Chapter 4263. After the meeting began, Ji Tianxing announced to the experts that he was leaving Reincarnation Island. Everyone was mentally prepared for this and knew that Kenshin couldn't stay on Reincarnation Island forever. Once the situation on Reincarnation Island was stabilized, Kenshin would definitely head to other continents and continue to save the people until he ruled the entire God Realm. But this day had arrived. Everyone felt that it was earlier than expected and they had mixed feelings about it. When Ji Tianxing was overseeing Yudu City, everyone felt a lot of pressure. They were careful with their words and actions, afraid that they would overstep their boundaries. Now that Ji Tianxing was leaving Reincarnation Island, they naturally felt relieved. But they definitely weren't happy and they couldn't send Ji Tianxing off. In fact, the experts were still a little reluctant. They hoped that Kenshin could stay for a while longer. That way they would have more confidence and peace of mind when carrying out various new policies and missions. At the same time, they would have more opportunities to perform and win Kenshin's favor. Everyone knew that the Sword God was fair in his rewards and punishments. He was never stingy and could be said to be extremely generous. If they could win Kenshin's favor and obtain some divine abilities and secret techniques, or receive guidance from Kenshin, it would be a great opportunity. Every divine king had the ambition to work hard and become a peak divine king. But their talents weren't outstanding enough. If they couldn't receive guidance from an expert like Kenshin, they wouldn't be able to reach the top in this lifetime. In short, everyone listened to Ji Tianxing's orders and instructions with mixed feelings. Ji Tianxing said to the experts, "From now on, the various affairs of Reincarnation Island would be managed and handled by them. Everyone had to carry out their duties. They couldn't shirk their responsibilities and couldn't form cliques." Many God King experts naturally obeyed respectfully. With the heavenly Tao oath binding them, they didn't dare to disobey. In addition, if they had any matters that they couldn't decide or handle, they could report to the 5 ancient clans for them to discuss and decide. If the Pine Crane clan, Hidden Dragon clan and the other clans couldn't make up their minds, they could contact him and let him handle it. Such a decision caused the pressure on the numerous experts to lessen, and they heaved a sigh of relief in secret. At the very least, this proved that Kenshin wasn't just going to leave Reincarnation Island to their own devices after conquering it. He would still pay attention to the situation on the Reincarnation Island. If there were any problems, he would find a way to solve them. Instead of handing the authority over to the experts present, he would hold them accountable when problems arose. 2 hours later, the meeting ended. Ji Tianxing prepared to leave Yudu, and numerous strong practitioners of the Divine King realm walked out of the meeting hall to send him off in the plaza outside the hall. At this moment, over a dozen god kings gathered the courage to report to Ji Tianxing after a brief moment of hesitation. They were willing to leave Samsara Island with Kenshin and conquer the other 3 continents. Although their strength wasn't considered top-notch, they were willing to contribute to Kenshin's hegemony in unifying the god realm. Whether it was serving as the Kenshin's entourage, assassins or scouts to assassinate targets, or to gather information, they were all capable of it. At the very least, they could charge and break through enemy lines, risking their lives to kill the enemy. Instantly, everyone's gazes gathered on the dozen god kings. Their expressions and gazes were somewhat complicated. They envied the god kings' quick-wittedness, but they also sympathized with them for taking greater risks in order to obtain more benefits and glory. In short, the god kings who could make such a decision had made a great decision after careful consideration. After all, those Divine King experts were the overlords of the Reincarnation Island. They were important officials under the Sword God and held great power in their hands. However, the situation on the Reincarnation Island had already been decided. Their power and status were far inferior to the 5 ancient clans, the commanders of the Imperial Guards and the 18 domain lords. They wanted to climb to a higher position and obtain greater strength and power. There wasn't much hope for them to stay on the Reincarnation Island, so they could only follow Kenshin into battle. However, if Kenshin wanted to conquer the other 3 continents, he would have to experience even more slaughter and bloody battles. These god kings would have to risk their lives. It wasn't easy for them to earn merits and survive. Simply put, these god kings were like Nangong Ao, Yuchipo, Zhanwudi and Lon Kai. For various reasons they wanted to follow Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing didn't reject them. After carefully examining each god king's strength and realm and understanding their personalities and specialties, he made a selection. A total of 16 god kings wanted to follow him, and Ji Tianxing chose 10 of them. The 10 god kings who were chosen were naturally filled with joy and pride, as if they had received a great honor. After all, this was in front of so many god kings. Kenshin choosing them was an acknowledgement of them. As for the 6 god kings who weren't chosen, they were naturally filled with disappointment like frost-beaten eggplants. They could only stay on the Reincarnation Island and find other ways to increase their strength and use their merits to obtain greater power and status. 15 minutes later, Ji Tianxing led his 10 followers onto the god-slaying battleship. Under the respectful escort of the god kings, they left Yudu City. Watching the god-slaying battleship disappear into the horizon, the god kings stood there for a long time before leaving. The white dragon was still steering the god-slaying battleship. It soared through the sky, heading straight for the firmament continent in the southwest. Within the battleship, Ji Tianxing's 15 followers were all in their own rooms, cultivating in secret chambers. In order to make it easier for them to complete missions in the future, Ji Tianxing taught the 10 new followers 3 kinds of concealment and assassination divine abilities. The requirements were also very simple. They needed to comprehend and master them within a month. The strength, talent and comprehension of the 10 followers were similar to Nangong Ao, Yuchipo and Zhanwudi. Back then Nangong Ao, Nangong Nihuang, and the rest only took 20 days to master them. Ji Tianxing believed that these 10 followers could master them within a month as well. The 10 followers were naturally overwhelmed by the divine abilities and secret techniques that Ji Tianxing gave them. They were overjoyed. When they heard that Kenshin required them to master them within a month so that they could use them when they went to the firmament continent, they all felt pressured. Luckily, when Ji Tianxing taught them the divine abilities and secret techniques, he also gave them the relevant cultivation experience and tips. This would allow the 10 followers to comprehend the divine abilities and secret techniques faster and master them faster. Just like that, the god-slaying battleship regained its peace. The 10 followers raced against time and focused on cultivating the divine abilities. Ji Tianxing also entered the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes Pagoda. He returned to the distorted space-time and continued to cultivate in seclusion. Now his strength had already reached 50 times that of a peak god king. However, he was still improving steadily every day. When he cultivated the heaven punishment divine skill, he constantly perfected the skill and deduced the next level of the skill. For this, he entered Kenshin's tomb again. He went to the wasteland to observe the heaven punishment sword formation, and went to the divine book pavilion to read the countless books that he had collected in his previous life. It was worth mentioning that Yun Yao, Ji Ku, Ji Wushuang, Ji Wuhan, and the rest had been cultivating in seclusion under the bloody flame sacred tree. Their strength had also increased tremendously. Chapter 4264. Not long ago, Yun Yao broke through the 7th level of the Divine King realm and became an upper-level Divine King. Soon after, Jiku also broke through to the 7th level of the Divine King realm and became an upper-level Divine King. In this way, Ji Tianxing's family and friends became even more powerful. In addition to Bai Feng, who was at the 8th level of the Divine King realm, and Yang and Chao Qingyu, who had already broken through to the 7th level of the Divine King realm, there were already 5 upper-level Divine Kings among Ji Tianxing's trusted aides. Even Ji Wuhan, Ji Wushuang, Lin Shui, and Zhen Hong had different levels of strength and realm improvement. Knowing that Ji Tianxing was rushing to the Firmament Continent and would start his operation in a month to conquer the Firmament Continent as soon as possible, everyone volunteered to fight. They had been in seclusion in the distorted spacetime for too long and wanted to participate in the battle to train themselves and consolidate their realm. Ji Tianxing agreed and told everyone to cultivate in peace. When the time was right, he would let them fight. At the same time, the news of Kenshin killing Commander Styx, conquering Yudu, and successfully controlling Reincarnation Island had already spread throughout the god world. The rulers and commoners of the boundless heaven continent were overjoyed when they heard the news and cheered for Kenshin. After all, the rulers and commoners of this continent were all Kenshin's people and supported Kenshin from the bottom of their hearts. However, the rulers and commoners of the Firmament Continent, Qiankun Continent, and Chaos Continent had different reactions. For nearly half a year, the rulers of these 3 continents kept hearing about Kenshin. They all knew that Kenshin wanted to conquer the 5 continents one by one and unify the entire god world. The boundless heaven continent was conquered by Kenshin first, followed by Reincarnation Island. Then, it would be one of the 3 continents. No one knew which continent Kenshin's next target would be after conquering Reincarnation Island. Therefore, the rulers of the 3 continents were worried and anxious, like ants on a hot pan. They knew that Kenshin's strength was very close to that of the God Emperor. With their strength, cultivation base, and divine abilities, even if they had 100,000 soldiers under their command, it would still be difficult for them to resist the Kenshin's invasion. Therefore, the first reaction of these people in power was to inform their god emperor and ask for reinforcements. The true bodies of the 3 god emperors who ruled the 3 continents had to remain in outer space to continue studying the mystery of the gray fog. They couldn't leave rashly or else they would suffer great losses. They could only send out their avatars and rush back to the divine world as fast as they could. Of course, those with avatars could do so. For example, the Prajna god emperor who controlled the primal chaos continent, and the 9 Yang god emperor who controlled the heaven and earth continent, had already sent incarnations back to the god realm. For example, the ruler of the firmament continent, the god emperor Dao Xingyun, was helpless. His avatar had already been killed by Ji Tianxing in outer space's heavenly policy starfield. Therefore, the rulers of the firmament continent who stayed behind, Dao Xingyun's trusted aides, couldn't do anything no matter how anxious they were. Dao Xingyun couldn't return to the divine world with his true body to resist Ji Tianxing's invasion. It was impossible for him to refine a new avatar in just 1 or 2 years. Dao Xingyun couldn't help his trusted generals and commanders with their requests for reinforcements. He could only come up with a few plans for his generals and instruct them to resist stubbornly and not surrender easily. Even if both sides knew that their generals and commanders were no match for the Kenshin, they would rather fight to the death and resist with their lives than let Kenshin win too easily. This concerned the reputation of the Star Cloud God Emperor. The rulers of the 3 continents were burning with anxiety. They hurriedly mobilized their troops, tightened their defenses, and set up layers of obstacles, traps, and ambushes. They were only waiting for the Kenshin to invade their territories, then they would fight back with all their might. However, the people of the 3 continents were full of anticipation day and night. They heard that the people of the boundless heaven continent and the reincarnation island had already regained their freedom. Not only did they no longer have to be slaves, But they also didn't have to work all day, mine resources, and worship the statue of the God Emperor on time. The people of the 3 continents were envious from the bottom of their hearts. They only hoped that they could regain their freedom as soon as possible. Even though the ordinary people didn't know what to do and didn't have the ability to help the Kenshin. However, they prayed silently in their hearts and prayed to the heavens for the Kenshin to be safe and successful. This was probably also an invisible force. In addition, there was a third group of people between the rulers of the 3 continents and the people of the 3 continents. These people were the top forces of the 3 continents, as well as the God Emperor powerhouses with independent identities. They weren't lackeys under the God Emperor's command. They hadn't been able to obtain greater authority or status, and they weren't as helpless as the common people. They had power, influence, and a certain level of status. Of course, there were also some ancient clans and top forces that weren't willing to swear allegiance to the God Emperor. They had been ostracized for thousands of years. Now that the God realm was in chaos and 2 continents had already been conquered by the Kenshin, they saw the dawn of hope. To them, the arrival of the Kenshin was a huge opportunity. If they could grasp this opportunity, they could very well change history and become important ministers under the Kenshin. They could also become the rulers of their respective continents. They failed. From the looks of it, the Kenshin came with great momentum. They had the support of the people and were at the peak of their power. There was almost no possibility of defeat. To put it simply, many ancient clans, top forces, and God Emperor powerhouses on the 3 continents were secretly gathering, communicating, and discussing with the intention of swearing allegiance to the Kenshin. The rulers of the 3 continents quickly sensed that the wind was blowing in the wrong direction. When they discovered that some forces and experts were secretly colluding with the Kenshin, they were instantly enraged. The rulers didn't have the confidence to fight against the Kenshin. Now that there were forces in their territories that wanted to join the Kenshin, they had to suppress them. If they couldn't suppress them, they could only use thunderous means to destroy them in the bud. Thus, Xianxia had just left Reincarnation Island and hadn't even reached any of the 3 continents when the 3 continents were in chaos. The situation on the Firmament continent was the most turbulent. After all, many forces and experts had heard that the Nebula God Emperor's avatar had fought with the Kenshin in the Heavenly Strategies starfield. In the end, the avatar of the Nebula God Emperor was destroyed by the Kenshin. Now that the Kenshin wanted to invade the Firmament continent, the Nebula God Emperor couldn't help. This also boosted the confidence of the ancient clans and forces, making them even more fearless in collusion. In the midst of the chaos, the rulers of the Firmament continent gathered many God Emperor powerhouses and elite warriors to suppress the clans and forces. In just 1 month, 2 top forces were annihilated and disintegrated under the suppression of tens of thousands of troops. Such methods also intimidated the other clans and forces. They could only lay low and put on a respectful posture, not daring to show the slightest hint of rebellion. Chapter 4265. The chaotic situation in the Firmament land was soon calmed down. Seeing that all the clans, forces, and King God Realm Masters were very obedient, the rulers were finally relieved. But they were still not completely at ease, so they forced the clans and forces one by one to surrender and pledge loyalty to the Nebula God Emperor. Although they could not make an oath to the Heavenly Way like Kenshin and use the supervision of the Heavenly Way to restrain the clans and forces. But they could use more despicable means to threaten and control the clans and forces. Suddenly, the situation and atmosphere of the Firmament land became extremely oppressive and heavy. It was as if a storm was coming. The ancient clans and forces were not pushovers, so they quickly came up with all kinds of ways to deal with it. Even if all kinds of methods were ineffective, they were still threatened by the rulers. But they still tried their best to stall for time as long as they could. They only hoped that Kenshin would arrive at the Firmament land as soon as possible, so that they could have a chance to get out of the trouble. In this way, the rulers of the Firmament land were busy fighting with the clans and forces, so they were inevitably distracted. So when the god-slaying battleship arrived at the Firmament land, it was not discovered by the rulers. The god-slaying battleship could enter the Firmament land quietly, mainly because the battleship hid its figure and aura. Even if this superb king-level divine battleship flew over a city, the King God Realm Masters guarding the city would not be able to detect its existence. The divine battleship entered a region in the north of the Firmament land and was flying over the sea of clouds. White Dragon drove the divine battleship while waking Xianxia up. "Master, we have entered the Firmament land. Do you have any instructions? He knew that his master already had a specific plan to conquer the firmament land. The main idea had been set long ago, but some details needed to be changed. So he did not ask about his master's plan, but directly asked for instructions. After a while, Ji Tianxing appeared in the meeting hall of the battleship and summoned Nangong Nihuang, Zhan Wudi and the others. Including the 10 chosen followers on Samsara Island, a total of 15 divine kings gathered in the meeting hall, waiting for Ji Tianxing's instructions. In addition, Yun Yao, Ji Ku, Bai Feng, Chao Qingyu, and the others also left the distorted spacetime and came to the meeting hall to act with everyone. In order to help Ji Tianxing conquer the firmament continent as soon as possible, they also had to contribute. Just like this, over 20 divine king powerhouses gathered together, but they maintained silence with great tacit understanding. Ji Tianxing first asked the 10 followers from the reincarnation island about their cultivation results. The 10 followers were filled with pride and answered that they had already mastered the 3 secret techniques and could use them freely. Ji Tianxing was relieved and said to everyone, "For us, the firmament land is a strange place. It would be difficult to conquer the entire firmament land within a year. The first thing we need to do is to figure out the specific situation of the firmament land and the current situation. Even though we all know that the people of the firmament land will definitely welcome our arrival. But the people can't do anything for us except pray and look forward to it. The most beneficial and most likely to help us are the many antiquity clans and forces in the firmament land. As far as I know, there are 33 antiquity clans in the firmament land, all of which are powerful forces. In addition, there are more than 20 top forces, all of which are very famous sects, alliances and families. Your next goal is to spread out to different regions of the firmament land and find out 2 things as soon as possible. First, who is the ruler of the firmament land now? How many divine kings and soldiers do you have? You must also get the detailed information of the nearly 100 territorial lords, their territorial lords' mansions and their detailed information. Second, which clans and forces have long been loyal to the Nebula God Emperor and will not be used by us? Which clans and forces are not used by the Nebula God Emperor? Which clans and forces are neutral? Or are they possibly loyal to me? As long as we can figure out these 2 things, the next step will be very simple. First, we need to conquer and gather those forces that can be used by us and form the rebel alliance. Then we will announce to the firmament land and officially launch the attack. After hearing Ji Tianxing's words, the people immediately had a detailed goal and plan in their minds. They no longer had any doubts and worries. At this time, a follower asked, "Master Kenshin, I have heard that the outer body incarnation of Dao Xingyun, the God Emperor who ruled the firmament land, once fought with you in the heavenly policy starfield and was destroyed by you. Is this true?" Ji Tianxing nodded and said, "That's right. Dao Xingyun only had one outer body incarnation and it was destroyed by me long ago. Although it has been a few years, it is impossible for Dao Xingyun to refine a second incarnation in such a short period of time. So, you can focus on carrying out the mission without worrying about Dao Xingyun's incarnation. Of course, when carrying out the mission, you must remember the principle of being bold but careful. With your strength and divine powers, as long as you are not surrounded by many god kings, you should be fine. Even if you are fighting against the region leaders, you may not lose." Among the 15 followers, the weakest one was at the 5th level of the Divine King realm. Most of them were at the upper level of the Divine King realm. The region leaders of the firmament land were basically at the same level of strength. Many of the followers had cultivated the divine powers that Ji Tianxing taught them. As long as they did not act rashly and only spied on the military and information, they would be safe. "Yes, Master." The 15 followers bowed and said yes, indicating that they would complete the mission smoothly. Then Ji Tianxing assigned them the specific targets of the mission. The targets of the 15 followers were to investigate more than 40 regions in the north of the firmament land. On average, each of them would be responsible for investigating 3 regions. Ji Tianxing gave them a deadline of 3 months. The time was not too long, but it was not too tight either. After the 15 followers received the order, they started to carry out the mission. Of course, the first 2 followers to leave the Deity Slayer battleship were going to investigate a few regions nearby. The other followers would continue to fly south on the Deity Slayer battleship and go deeper into the firmament land. They would only leave the battleship when the Deity Slayer battleship was closest to their targets. After all, the Deity Slayer battleship was much faster than them. After Ji Tianxing assigned the missions to the 15 followers, Yunyao, Jiku and the others asked what their missions and targets were. Chapter 4266. The realm of Azure Heaven was the center of the Azure Heaven land. That was the core of the entire continent because the rulers of the entire continent lived in Tiandu. Tiandu sounded like the name of a city. In fact, it was a paradise, an alternate dimension with powerful defenses and excellent resources. The palace of the Nebula God Emperor and his abode were in Heaven Capital. Now that the Nebula God Emperor was not in the Firmament Continent, his right-hand men were left in the Firmament Continent to control the overall situation. They were definitely in the Divine Capital. Ji Tianxing gave the easier and safer missions to his followers. He would go to the most dangerous places to find out the most important secrets. The dozen or so followers were well aware of this and they were grateful for it. They had to admit that Kenshin could conquer all the continents not only because of his strength but also because of his unique charisma. For example, the 10 God King experts that had just followed him. Just from this small detail, there was an additional sense of respect and gratitude towards Ji Tianxing. As time went by, they would follow Ji Tianxing for a long time. Like Yang, Chao Qingyu and Bai Feng, they would become Ji Tianxing's most trusted subordinates. At that time they would respect and admire Ji Tianxing from the bottom of their hearts. They would be closer to Ji Tianxing as friends. Day after day the god-slaying battleship went deeper into the Azure Heaven land and crossed one region after another. Along the way 1 or 2 followers would leave every 2 or 3 regions to carry out missions. Half a month later, the god-slaying battleship entered the center of the Azure Heaven land and was not far from the realm of Azure Heaven. At this time, all 15 followers left the battleship. At the same time, the first follower who left the battleship to carry out a mission found out the general situation of a region and reported it to Ji Tianxing. That region was at the northern edge of the Azure Heaven land and close to the boundless sky sea. Probably because it was too remote and Kenshin's first stop on the way to the Azure Heaven land from the Reincarnation Island, the ruler gave it up. The ruler of the region stayed in the domain chief's mansion and blocked it. No one was allowed to go in or out. Only messages from Heaven Capital could be sent to the domain chief's mansion. At the same time, the ruler gathered all the soldiers he could and hid in the domain chief's mansion. The ruler's attitude was that no matter how Kenshin invaded his territory, he just needed to hide in the domain chief's mansion. If Kenshin broke into the domain chief's mansion, he would wait and see what would happen. Anyway, no reinforcements would come to help him and the rulers of Heaven Capital would not come in person. He was a small ruler with only about 10,000 soldiers and only 2,000 of them. How could he resist Kenshin's army? The person in power had given up on him and he had also given up on himself. In addition to this news, the follower also sent back another message. He had heard that the current ruler of the Firmament Continent was the famous godly King Tianyu and the 4 battle generals under his command. Celestial King was the cousin of the God Emperor Daoist. He was also a peak divine king who broke through 800 years ago. He was cruel, vicious and good at scheming. He was very strict with his subordinates and had great prestige and deterrence among the people. Celestial King's generals were all experts at the LV9 Divine King realm and ranked among the top 20 experts in the Azure Heaven land. Only the patriarchs and supreme elders of the ancient clans were qualified to be mentioned in the same breath as them. The generals had different personalities. Some were brave, some were smart and some were good at hiding. But the one thing they had in common was that the 4 war commanders were all very talented in commanding troops. They had experienced countless battles and had rarely been defeated. In addition, there should be a large number of Divine King experts hiding in Heaven Capital such as guardians and elders. The follower said that he only heard the general information and did not know the details. He asked Lord Kenshin to be careful. Ji Tianxing was deeply gratified and satisfied with this result. He sent a message to that follower, expressing his affirmation of the efficiency of his work. Even though he didn't say any words of praise, the follower was still filled with joy and excitement after receiving the message. After all, it was a great honor to be praised by Lord Kenshin. 3 days later, the god-slaying battleship entered the central part of the Azure Heaven land and came to the entrance of Heaven Capital. The entrance of Heaven Capital was located in the vast mountain range with a radius of 1 million miles. It was hidden in the vast sea of clouds. The 200,000 miles around the entrance had long been set up by experts to conceal the original appearance of the place. Even if it was a God King expert without someone from Tiandu leading the way, they they would lose their way and fall into a trap. Therefore, the vast forests and mountains around Heaven Capital had always been deserted. The god-slaying battleship hovered in the sky above the vast mountain range. It was invisible and was not afraid of being discovered. White Dragon was controlling the god-slaying battleship in the cockpit. Ji Tianxing stood behind him and silently released his divine sense to explore the surrounding 100,000 miles. He was exploring the area shrouded in the sea of clouds with the Confusion Formation. The entrance of Heaven Capital was in the center of the Confusion Formation, the most hidden place. Even with Ji Tianxing's divine sense, he could not see the situation at the entrance in a short time. The god-slaying battleship hovered in this area for a dozen laps. It took 6 hours for Ji Tianxing to break the Confusion Formation and see the situation at the entrance of Heaven Capital. It was a cloud platform with a radius of 100 miles. There were 5,000 elite guards stationed on it. All of them were wearing armor and holding swords. They were on high alert. There were 20 Divine King experts leading the 5,000 guards. Among them there were 2 high-level Divine Kings. It could be seen that Celestial King attached great importance to the safety of Heaven Capital. He did not hesitate to send a large number of troops to guard here. The formation at the entrance was also closed and would not be opened easily. No one could enter or leave. As a result, Ji Tianxing's dream of turning into dust and attaching himself to some expert to sneak into Tiandu was also destroyed. This Confusion Formation is actually a king-level divine formation. It seems to be the work of Dao Xingyun. It was set up 1,000 years ago. In the future, when the Rebel Alliance's army is established, even if they subdue nearly 100 regions, they will be blocked by the Confusion Formation and will not be able to enter Heaven Capital. Ji Tianxing seemed to be muttering to himself. He frowned and thought of a way to break the formation. White Dragon thought for a moment and asked, "Master, this Confusion Formation must be broken, but we can't touch it now. I'm afraid we will alert the enemy?" Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and said, "That's right. Master came to Heaven Capital this time to inquire about the situation in Heaven Capital. I want to know what precautions and plans Celestial King has. It will be easier to take action in the future and reduce the casualties of the soldiers. Before subduing 100 regions, Master will not rashly attack Heaven Capital." Chapter 4267. Although Ji Tianxing would not attack Tiandu in the short term, but he had to understand the situation of Tiandu in advance and think of a way to break the maze formation. Only then could he break the formation at any time when he entered Tiandu in the future. In the previous 6 hours he only understood the structure of the maze formation, saw through all the concealment, and saw the real situation inside the formation. Next, the god-slaying warship circled around the maze formation a few times at a neither fast nor slow speed. Ji Tianxing used another 8 hours to carry out tens of thousands of deductions, calculations, and repeated verifications in his mind before he confirmed 2 ways to break the formation. One was a literary method, the other was a martial method. From the literal meaning, one could understand that the first method was a gentle method to break the formation. The advantage of this method was that the movement was very small, very covert, and would not arouse the vigilance of the guards at the Grotto Heaven entrance. But the disadvantage was that it needed a long time, estimated to be about a day, and it consumed a lot of mind and divine power. The second martial method was to use violence and force to break the maze formation. The disadvantage was that the movement was big and would definitely arouse the attention of the guards at the entrance, and then lead to being besieged and blocked. But the advantage was that the speed was faster and the method was simple and crude, estimated to only need 2 hours to break. Of course, the martial method sounded very reckless, but it was not attacking blindly. If it was other people, even if it was a peak divine king, wanting to forcefully break the maze formation was also impossible. Only Ji Tianxing, this formation path grandmaster, after analyzing the structure of the maze formation, could find the relatively weak and very crucial 2 nodes from the 200 million nodes of the formation. And only by attacking those 2 nodes of the formation could the formation be broken in the shortest time. After thinking of a way to break the formation, Ji Tianxing let Bai Long drive the warship and leave this area. Bai Long was somewhat eager to try, seemingly a little unwilling, and asked, "Master, haven't you already found the way to break the formation? Are we leaving like this? Don't you plan to sneak into Tiandu and see the situation and military strength inside?" Ji Tianxing waved his hand and said, "If I want to sneak into Tiandu, I need to spend 1 or 2 days to break the maze formation and get close to the entrance of the Grotto Heaven without alerting the guards. but the defensive formation at the entrance is closed. Needless to say, it must be the supreme grade divine formation personally set up by Dao Xingyun. Under the eyes of 5,000 guards, I need to break that formation without anyone knowing and enter Tiandu. The difficulty is too great and the risk is too great. Now our whereabouts is still confidential. Celestial King does not know that we have come. If my whereabouts are exposed, I will immediately engage in a decisive battle with Empyrean God King and his elite soldiers. Bai Long was suddenly at a loss for words. He smiled awkwardly and said, "That's impossible and there's no need to take such a big risk just to get information." "Well, where are we going next?" Ji Tianxing said indifferently, "We can't enter Tiandu at the moment, so we can only start from the surrounding regions to get more information. Especially those region leaders and the leaders of the ancient clans and top forces, they must know something about Tiandu." White Dragon suddenly understood and immediately guessed that his master was going to ask those region leaders and experts for information. If possible, his master would most likely subdue those experts and secretly take them under his command. When the news that Kenshin had arrived in the firmament land spread, his master would have gathered many forces and experts under his command. Just thinking about it, White Dragon felt that this plan was very reliable and gave him a sense of accomplishment. He could also imagine the expressions of Celestial King and the four generals when they learned the news and the truth. After leaving the vast mountains, the first target of the god-slaying battleship was the domain leader's mansion in the firmament land. Although Tiandu was in the center of the firmament land and was the power core of the whole firmament land. But there was still a domain leader and the domain leader's mansion in the firmament land. The domain leader of the firmament land was like the imperial city governor of the secular imperial city, with a very special status. Although he was only a domain leader in name, he was the noblest and most powerful one among all the domain leaders. At the same time, this domain leader was also one of the disciples of the Star God Emperor and a frequent visitor to Tiandu. Among the 100 domain leaders, he was the one who was closest to the Celestial King and the four generals and knew the situation of Tiandu the best. Ji Tianxing thought that if he could find the domain leader of the firmament land, he must subdue him with the oath of the heavenly way. Not only could he learn about the situation in Heaven Capital from the ruler of Firmament Domain, but he could also use the ruler of Firmament as a spy to monitor the movements of Empyrean God King and the four great commanders. However, the dream was beautiful but the reality was cruel. One day later, when Ji Tianxing tried his best to sneak into the domain leader's mansion, he found nothing. The domain leader's mansion was also in a resource-rich alternate space. It was heavily guarded and the entrance was closed. Ji Tianxing finally cracked the formation at the entrance and sneaked into the domain leader's mansion without alerting anyone. However, he didn't find the domain leader after 2 rounds of searching. There were only 2,000 elite guards and thousands of family members, servants and handymen in the domain leader's mansion. Among them, the strongest and most powerful ones were the 2 guard commanders and the wife of the domain master of Firmament Realm. Not to mention the domain leader, even the deputy domain leader was missing. Ji Tianxing was a little disappointed. He didn't need to investigate to know that the domain leader and the deputy domain leader were most likely hiding in Tiandu with a large number of elite soldiers. Or they were on a mission ordered by the Celestial King. If it was the latter, he could find another chance to capture the domain leader. If it was the former, he had to give up the plan temporarily. Later, Ji Tianxing secretly captured a guard captain in the domain leader's mansion. There was a reason why he chose this person as his target. The guard captain had been patrolling for a month and was very tired. He and another guard captain took turns to be on duty. After the handover, he returned to his residence and prepared to recuperate for a period of time. In this way, the guard captain knew what had happened in the past month and disappeared for a month without being noticed. Ji Tianxing didn't even interrogate him after he captured him. He directly killed him, refined his godhead and plundered his divine soul memory. Through his divine soul memory, he knew the whereabouts of the domain leader and the deputy domain leader. It turned out that the Celestial King had summoned all the domain leaders and elite soldiers to Tiandu more than 20 days ago. The domain leader was the first to be summoned because of his special identity. Chapter 4268. The guard captain's status was low, so he didn't know much. Especially the secret information that Ji Tianxing wanted to know. For example, which territory lords had the Celestial King summoned? What was the situation in Heaven Capital? How many soldiers and god kings were there? The guard captain knew nothing about this. Although Ji Tianxing felt a little regretful, he didn't care since he got the information he wanted the most. Since he couldn't do anything in the realm of Green Heaven, he could only choose to leave and go to other territories to find opportunities. The god-slaying battleship came and left quietly, rushing to the next territory. After leaving the realm of Green Heaven, Ji Tianxing assigned tasks to everyone. Yun Yao and Ji Wuhan worked together to investigate the situation in several territories. Ji Ku and Ji Wushuang worked together to investigate the other 4 territories. Chao Qingyu and Lan worked together to investigate a territory. Yan Ku and Bai Feng were stronger, so they acted alone and were in charge of investigating the 3 regions. Lin Shui, Jin Hong, Blood Illusion God King, Gold Left Emissary and Blood Dragon Right Emissary were weaker. They were all lower god kings, but they insisted on participating. Therefore, Ji Tianxing let the 5 of them work together to investigate a few territories. They could take care of each other. As for Ji Tianxing, he would take White Dragon to the south of the realm of Green Heaven to investigate more territories. If there were any unexpected situations, he would rush there as fast as he could. As a result, all of Ji Tianxing's followers, relatives, and friends went to carry out their missions. They would investigate more than 70 territories. They believed that they would be able to collect comprehensive information. As for the remaining 20 territories, Ji Tianxing would investigate some of them. Even if there were some territories that they didn't have time to investigate, it didn't matter. If they could figure out the situation in more than 70 territories, they could basically represent the entire realm of Green Heaven. 8 days later, the god-slaying battleship arrived at the south of the realm of Green Heaven. At this time, Yun Yao, Ji Ku, Chao Qingyu, Lin Shui, and the others left the battleship one after another and headed to the designated area to gather information. Only Ji Tianxing and White Dragon were left in the battleship. They arrived at a new area and began to gather information. In the past few days, the followers who had been inquiring about the situation in the northern part of the firmament continent had also sent messages to Ji Tianxing, reporting the situation in various regions. What was interesting was that a portion of the regions at the edge of the continent did not lead their elite soldiers to gather at Tiandu. They chose to stay behind and guard the domain chief's manor. They closed the entrance of the domain chief's manor and resigned themselves to fate. And the further south they went, the more domain lords brought their elites and rushed to Tiandu to gather. All in all, it was the order of the Celestial King that there were more domain lords heading towards Tiandu. Those who stayed behind in the domain chief's manor were usually domain lords who were not favored and did not receive much resources or training. Or they were discontented and intended to be loyal to the Kenshin. In short, the firmament continent under the rule of the Celestial King was not a monolith. Hundreds of domain lords were not united and could not reach a consensus. This was good news for Ji Tianxing. It would be easier for him to unify the entire firmament continent in the future. Time passed day after day. Ji Tianxing spent 2 days to gather information about a region. He knew that the domain lord of this region had led his elite soldiers to Tiandu. He decisively went to the next region. 2 days later, he sneaked into the domain chief's manor of this region and found the domain lord. Interestingly, the domain lord had closed the domain chief's manor. There were only thousands of family members, servants, handymen, and more than 1,000 guards accompanying him. The deputy domain lord had led more than 1,000 elite soldiers to gather at Tiandu. Ji Tianxing used some new means and found out that the domain lord and the deputy domain lord had disagreements. They had quarreled many times before and finally this situation had occurred. The domain lord was dissatisfied with the Celestial King, while the deputy domain lord was the Celestial King's loyal dog. It was said that the Celestial King appreciated and valued the deputy domain lord greatly when he learned that they had parted ways. He was very disappointed and angry with the domain lord. The Celestial King would soon order to remove the domain lord from his position and take him to Tiandu for trial. At that time, the deputy domain lord would take over the domain lord's position. Knowing this, Ji Tianxing did not alert the domain lord. Instead, he quietly sneaked into the secret room where the domain lord meditated. He sealed the secret room with a formation to ensure that no one could detect anything unusual. Then he appeared in front of the domain lord and they talked alone. When the domain lord saw him, he was shocked and subconsciously wanted to fight back and call for help. However, Ji Tianxing only needed to say one sentence to calm the domain lord down. After carefully sizing up Ji Tianxing, The region master compared him to his memories and confirmed Ji Tianxing's identity. He was immediately surprised and overjoyed, and he was so excited that he spoke incoherently. Ji Tianxing sat down calmly and looked at the domain lord. He bowed respectfully and said a lot of words of admiration and flattery. When the domain lord calmed down, Ji Tianxing told him the purpose of his visit and got to the point. My whereabouts are confidential. You are the first person to see me in the firmament land. So you only have two choices. You can either be loyal to me or disappear. The domain lord nodded quickly and felt a little proud. He said excitedly, Master Kenshin, please rest assured. I have been looking forward to your arrival. For this reason, I did not hesitate to fall out with the deputy domain lord and offend the celestial king. I have been waiting for this day. I will swear allegiance to you now and keep this secret. I will never leak the news. The domain lord patted his chest and promised that he would keep this secret. He had already regarded himself as Kenshin's subordinate. In the face of such a sensible domain lord, Ji Tianxing was relieved. He took out a jade slip and threw it in front of the domain lord. The domain lord did not ask anything. He took the jade slip and solemnly read the heavenly oath. Obviously, before Ji Tianxing arrived in the firmament land, the domain lord had heard a lot about Kenshin and already knew the rules of Kenshin. No matter how terrible the heavenly oath made by Kenshin was, if he wanted to surrender and be loyal to Kenshin, he had to read it. Since the experts of the Boundless Heaven continent and the Samsara island had all read the heavenly oath, what was there to be afraid of? With this mentality, the domain lord was fearless. It only took him a few minutes to finish reading the heavenly oath. Then his whole body lit up with colorful divine light. A wisp of Daoist rime appeared on top of his head. Thunder roared and flashed in the sky above the domain lord's mansion. Feeling the mighty heavenly might, the domain lord was frightened. At the same time, he admired and respected Kenshin even more. At the same time, he could not help but imagine that since he was the first person to swear allegiance to Kenshin in the firmament land, he must seize the opportunity and perform well. He was one step ahead of everyone. As long as there were no accidents, he would definitely become Kenshin's most trusted and valued right-hand man in the future. Chapter 4269. In fact, Ji Tianxing only had a basic understanding of the first territorial master he pledged his loyalty to and did not continue. Although the territorial master was loyal, he was only at the LV6 Divine King realm. He was destined to not have many achievements. In the future, when Ji Tianxing unified the entire firmament land, it would be difficult for the territorial master to take on a big responsibility, let alone govern the land on behalf of him. Of course, the territorial master was not strong enough. More importantly, as the territorial master, he could not restrain the deputy territorial master and let him take away more than 1,000 elite soldiers. This showed that the territorial master's courage and means were still somewhat lacking. Seeing that Ji Tianxing was silent, the territorial master hesitated for a moment and decided to take the initiative to find an opportunity to perform and make a contribution. He plucked up his courage and asked, Master Kenshin, if you have any orders, I will do as you say. I am willing to share your burdens even if it means sacrificing my life. Obviously, the territorial master wanted Ji Tianxing to arrange some tasks for him. Although he was the first to surrender, if he carried out a task it would be dangerous. But he knew that wealth came from danger. Only by doing this could he show Kenshin his determination and loyalty. However, he neglected the most important point. At present he only had more than 1,000 guards under his command, and they were not elite troops. Most of them were middle divine emperors and lower divine emperors. Even if he asked the territorial master to mobilize the troops of the empires, few emperors would obey his orders. In other words, it was difficult for him to carry out any important tasks with his troops. Ji Tianxing did not say it clearly. He just waved his hand and said, I am investigating and grasping the situation of the firmament land. It is not suitable for me to do anything for the time being. Just tell me what you know. The territorial master was a little disappointed when he heard this, but he was secretly relieved. Although he could not make a contribution, at least he could be of some use. It was a comfort, at least he did not have to risk his life. Thus he told Ji Tianxing everything he knew about the situation in full detail. Before this, he did not make the necessary preparations. Therefore, when he reported the news to Ji Tianxing, he said whatever came to his mind. Ji Tianxing listened patiently, asking questions from time to time for the region master to answer. Just like that, the two of them talked in the secret room for 4 hours before ending. Xianxia now had a better understanding of the situation in the firmament land. For example, the general situation of the dozens of domain masters, roughly which clans and forces were loyal to the Celestial King, and which clans and forces were neutral. Previously, which forces had shown signs of resistance and had the intention to join the Kenshin. This information was very useful to Xianxia. At the very least, he knew that at least 6 ancient clans and 4 peak powers had long since planned to pledge their loyalty to him. Xianxia didn't stay any longer and was about to leave after the domain leader told him everything he knew. Before he left, he warned the region lord, "This matter must be kept a secret and must not be known to anyone else. I'll leave you 3 jade slips. If there is any emergency or important news, you can report directly to me. In addition, you can stay in the domain leader's mansion and wait for my orders." The region lord nodded quickly to show that he understood. He bowed respectfully and saw Xianxia off. Of course, Xianxia's departure was also very quiet. Other than the region lord, no one else knew. Then Xianxia went to other regions to continue to inquire about the news. If he met any region lord who was still in the domain leader's mansion, he would take him down without hesitation. During this period, more than a dozen followers, Yunyao, Jiku, and others sent him messages one after another, reporting the situation of each region. The situation was similar in both the north and the south of the firmament land. Most of the region lords were loyal to the Celestial King and the Nebula God Emperor. They were ordered to bring their elites to Heaven Capital. Only a few region lords stayed in the domain leader's mansion. They were not willing to follow the orders of the Celestial King, nor did they dare to openly pledge allegiance to the Kenshin. Judging from the current situation, the Celestial King's strategy was the same as that of the Imperial Tutor of the Boundless Heaven Continent and Commander Mingi of the Reincarnation Island. Without the protection of the God Emperor, they could only gather all the region lords, clans and forces and hide in one place to resist the invasion of the Kenshin. They didn't dare to take the initiative to attack, nor did they dare to disperse their forces to avoid being defeated by the Kenshin one by one. There was nothing new about this method. It could even be regarded as a helpless move. However, this was the best method that the rulers of each continent could come up with. At the same time, this method could indeed delay time and slow down the speed of Xianxia's domination of the entire continent. At least, he didn't dare to launch a general attack before the rebel alliance was established. Unknowingly, another 10 days had passed. Xianxia investigated 3 more regions. The 3 region lords had rushed to Heaven Capital with their elites. The domain leader's mansion was empty. However, Xianxia didn't attack the domain leader's mansion because it was meaningless. According to the feedback and intelligence from his followers, relatives and friends, most of the region lords were experts of the top forces and gathered in Heaven Capital. Even if there were a few region lords who stayed in the domain leader's mansion and the leaders of the top forces, they either remained neutral and watched coldly from the sidelines, or their forces were slightly weaker. Xianxia's plan to unify the firmament continent was delayed again and again. There was no breakthrough in a short period of time. At this time, Yunyao sent him a piece of good news. A good news that made Xianxia excited and full of expectations. In the south-central part of the firmament continent, Yunyao accidentally heard a piece of news when she was investigating the 4th region. The top force in this region, the Fantasy Sun sect, had close contact with several ancient clans and top forces. The 6 forces were dissatisfied with the Celestial King and intended to unite and join the Kenshin. Unfortunately, 2 months ago, the Celestial King sent a large number of experts and elite troops to annihilate one of the forces and killed tens of thousands of alliance members. Such forceful and vicious methods forced the other 5 powers to have no choice but to vanish without a trace, and they didn't dare reveal any intention to rely on the Sword God any longer. Even so, the Celestial King didn't intend to let them go. He used all kinds of despicable and shameless methods to force the 5 forces to surrender and pledge allegiance. Now the 5 forces could only struggle and try all kinds of ways to stall for time. They refused to bow their heads and admit defeat, nor could they unite to openly rebel. They could only be suppressed by the Celestial King in anger and helplessness, and their forces were constantly weakened. When Yunyao sent the news to Xianxia, she quickly rushed to the Fantasy Sun sect. She wanted to meet the master of the Fantasy Sun sect and negotiate with them in person. Even if Xianxia couldn't be there for the time being, She wanted to replace Ji Tianxing and conquer the Fantasy Sun sect and the other four forces in the name of the Kenshin. Chapter 4270. As husband and wife for 200 years, Ji Tianxing knew Yun Yao's nature very well. She was never a reckless and impulsive person. She was even more benevolent, loving, and intelligent. But even so, Ji Tianxing was still worried and anxious when he heard that she was going to take her son to Illusory Sun sect to negotiate with the upper echelons of Illusory Sun sect. He immediately sent a message to Yun Yao, telling her not to act rashly. He would meet up with them as soon as possible. When the time came, he would appear and subdue Illusory Sun sect. If Yun Yao and Ji Wuhan went to Illusory Sun sect and encountered an accident, the consequences would be too serious. However, Yun Yao replied to Ji Tianxing, saying that those forces were in deep water and had been forced into a corner by the Celestial King. The situation was very urgent. If she delayed for one more day, those forces might not be able to withstand the pressure of the Celestial King and surrender to the Celestial King. Not to mention that she had enough strength and confidence to protect Wuhan and herself. Just the determination of those five forces showed clearly that they wanted to rely on the Kenshin. As long as she stated her identity and purpose, she believed that those five forces would not make things difficult for her. Moreover, even if something unexpected happened, she had her own unique skills and supreme-grade divine artifacts, which were enough to protect herself. Ji Tianxing was worried about his wife's decision, but he still respected and acquiesced. At the same time, he had the white dragon rush over as fast as possible. Late at night the next day, Yun Yao went through many twists and turns, and spent a lot of effort to pass through many obstacles and encirclements, and sneak into the headquarters of Illusory Sun sect. This sect had 10,000 years of history, and its strength and foundation could be considered top-notch. It was located in a blessed land. For almost half a month, the experts and forces under the Celestial King had surrounded this blessed land and stared at Illusory Sun sect. Even a fly could not fly out of the blessed land, let alone the people of Illusory Sun sect. In addition, the Celestial King was still pressuring Illusory Sun sect to surrender. Illusory Sun sect's subordinate forces and countless properties had been destroyed and confiscated by Celestial King. The current Illusory Sun sect was no longer as powerful as it was in the past. All that was left was this blessed land and 10,000 disciples. Even though the Illusory Sun sect master and the elders were determined, they gritted their teeth and refused to surrender to the Celestial King. However, some of the elders, deacons, and disciples in the sect were unable to withstand such enormous pressure. They had been in a state of panic, unable to eat or sleep in peace. Recently, the pressure on the Illusory Sun sect had reached its peak. Different voices had already appeared within the sect. Almost half of the disciples, deacons, and elders were shaken and had the thought of surrendering. The Illusory Sun sect master felt helpless. He did not want to yield to the Celestial King, but he also did not want to see the sect split up and his disciples lose their lives. Faced with such a difficult choice, he had been hesitating, struggling, and waiting. At this time, two messengers sent by the Celestial King entered Illusory Sun-blessed land under the escort of 10 guards. In the past month, this was already the 5th batch of messengers sent by the Celestial King. When the guards at the gate reported this news to the Illusory Sun sect master, the Illusory Sun sect master immediately frowned. Deep worry flashed through his eyes. This was because he knew that the Celestial King's patience had reached its limit. The two messengers that had arrived tonight were most likely here to deliver an ultimatum. If he could not make a decision tonight, then the Illusory Sun sect would completely lose their chance. Within 2 days at the latest, the army sent by the Celestial King would arrive and attack the Illusory Sun sect. Simply put, the time to decide the fate of the Illusory Sun sect had arrived. No matter how unwilling the Illusory Sun sect master was, he had no choice but to order the guards to lead the messengers into the main hall and serve them tea. At the same time, he ordered the guards to inform the elders to gather in the main hall. After a short few minutes, the 9 elders of the Illusory Sun sect had gathered in the main hall. Afterwards, the Illusory Sun sect master also entered the main hall, wearing a magnificent robe and a divine crown on his head. Even though the relationship between the two sides had become very stiff and hostile, the two messengers were also very arrogant and lofty. But after meeting, the Illusory Sun sect master and the 9 elders still had to bow to the two messengers and exchange some false pleasantries. The two messengers were not even willing to sit down and had an impatient look on their faces. After exchanging pleasantries, they directly stated their intentions. Indeed, they were here to deliver an ultimatum on behalf of the Celestial King. Illusory Sun Sect Master, you have already thought of all kinds of methods and excuses to delay for more than a month. We are all smart people, so we can't be bothered to beat around the bush with you. In any case, we have already talked about everything that needs to be said. No matter how benevolent and magnanimous the Celestial King is, there is a limit to his patience. We cannot allow you to repeatedly challenge his bottom line. Tonight, we two messengers have come here on behalf of the Celestial King. We will not waste words with you. We only want a word from the Illusory Sun Sect. Will you surrender or not? I advise you to think carefully before answering. Don't make a mistake. The entire firmament continent is the territory of His Majesty the God Emperor. The Celestial King is ruling this continent on behalf of His Majesty the God Emperor. All the territories and people should submit to him. Therefore, it is natural for the Illusory Sun Sect to be loyal to the Celestial King. If the Illusory Sun Sect dares to resist, you should know the result. After all, General Nanfeng has already left with 10,000 soldiers. He is not far from here. The two messengers directly threatened the Illusory Sun Sect Master, leaving no room for delay. There was no other way. In this month, the deadlock had been delayed too many times. The Celestial King was not willing to wait any longer. The Illusory Sun Sect Master and the 9 elders also knew that they had already delayed to the limit. They could not delay any longer. Tonight they had to make a decision and give a clear answer. Otherwise, the two messengers would not leave the matter at that. The Celestial King would also not let the Illusory Sun Sect go. Seeing the Illusory Sun Sect Master and the elders frowning, they remained silent. The atmosphere in the hall was heavy and oppressive. The two messengers had mocking smiles on their faces as they silently waited for the Illusory Sun Sect Master to give an answer. But at this moment, a soft sound of someone falling to the ground suddenly woke everyone up. Bang! Everyone subconsciously turned their heads and looked at the corner of the hall's door. They saw that beside the closed door in a dark corner, there were originally 5 guards who had followed the two messengers here. And at this moment, those 5 High Divine Lord Realm guards had all lost their vitality, collapsing in a pool of blood. Beside the 5 corpses stood a beautiful woman in a white dress and an extremely handsome youth with a cold temperament. Before the crowd could see their faces clearly, they did not have time to think about who they were or why they had appeared here. They teleported to the other side of the door and instantly killed the other 5 guards with lightning speed. Chapter 4271. In the blink of an eye, the 10 guards brought by the two messengers had turned into 10 corpses in the hall. The beautiful goddess in white, who seemed to be otherworldly, walked to the center of the hall with the handsome and cold young man, ignoring the astonished gazes of the crowd. Looking at her gentle, holy and elegant temperament, how did she look like a god king who had just killed a few guards? The two messengers, whose faces were full of astonishment, finally came back to their senses. Suddenly, they flew into a rage and pointed at the woman in the white dress and shouted angrily, "You damned bitch, how dare you kill my accompanying guards?" The other messenger also yelled angrily, "Who are you? Why did you ambush this lord's guards?" Before the white-clothed woman could answer, the two messengers looked at each other and guessed the answer. They suddenly turned around and looked at the Illusory Sun Sect Master with ferocious expressions. They yelled, "It's you. They're from the Illusory Sun Sect. You're the one who arranged all of this." Illusory Sun Sect Master, I didn't think you would still be so stubborn and make such a choice. Do you want to silence us? If we don't leave the Illusory Sun-blessed land alive in 4 hours, the Celestial King and Commander Nanfeng will receive the news. Then the entire Illusory Sun-blessed land will be destroyed. Everyone in the Illusory Sun Sect will be buried with us. As they yelled these words, the two messengers became emotional. Their faces turned red and killing intent surged from their bodies. Before coming to the Illusory Sun Sect, they were already mentally prepared. Once the Illusory Sun Sect chose to resist to the end, they would definitely kill them. However, they always felt that the Illusory Sun Sect wouldn't choose to resist. They would most likely compromise and surrender. However, they didn't think that the worst outcome would still happen. Faced with the two messengers' questions, the Illusory Sun Sect Master was a little stunned. The 9 elders stared at the white-clothed woman and the cold young man, dumbfounded. When the illusory Sun Sect master came back to his senses, he couldn't help but spread his hands and smile bitterly. Messengers, if this lord told you that this lord doesn't know them, would you believe me? In reality, the illusory Sun Sect master, the first elder and the second elder were all stronger. They were all at the 8th level of the God King realm or above. As soon as they stepped into the meeting hall, they felt that something was wrong. On the surface, the 2 messengers only brought 10 guards into the hall. However, they could vaguely sense that there seemed to be a weak aura hidden among the 10 guards. However, the illusory Sun Sect master and the 2 elders thought that it was a backup plan left behind by the 2 messengers, so they didn't expose it. In addition, the 2 messengers went straight to the point and issued an ultimatum, which diverted the attention of the illusory Sun Sect master and the others. However, no one expected that the hidden aura would appear in the end. It was a white-clothed woman and a cold-looking young man. Furthermore, they had instantly killed the messengers' accompanying guards. This was too bizarre. The illusory Sun Sect had become the scapegoat for no reason at all. Where was the logic? Sure enough, the 2 messengers looked at the illusory Sun Sect master as if he was an idiot and scolded, "Bullshit. Are you messing with us? Do you think we're fools? Illusory Sun Sect leader, no matter how much you argue, it's useless. Your illusory Sun Sect is doomed. And if you want to kill this lord, I'm afraid it won't be that easy." As they spoke, the 2 messengers took out their divine weapons, and their bodies emitted soaring, killing intent. "Come. If you want to kill us, then even if we die, we'll drag a few of you down with us." The 2 messengers held their weapons and stood back to back as they stared fiercely at the crowd. Of course, they only appeared to be particularly fierce. In fact, they were already quietly moving, looking for an opportunity to rush out of the hall. Seeing that the 2 sides were about to fight, the illusory Sun Sect master became anxious. He stared at the white-clothed woman and the cold-looking young man and asked anxiously, "You two, who exactly are you? When did you enter the hall and how did you break into our sect's territory?" Regardless of whether the illusory Sun Sect surrendered or not, he had to figure out the identity of the white-clothed woman and the young man. The illusory Sun Sect couldn't become the scapegoat for no reason. Unexpectedly, the white-clothed woman didn't give an answer directly. Instead, she said with an indifferent expression, "We are the same as the 2 of them. We are messengers." Ah! Not only was the illusory Sun Sect master stunned, but the 9 elders were also puzzled and confused. "Whose messengers are you? Whose message are you sending? Even if you're messengers, you can't kill the guards of these 2 messengers. Aren't you framing our illusory Sun Sect?" "That's right. If we don't explain this matter clearly today, our illusory Sun Sect will become the scapegoat. We'll rebel even if we don't want to." The elders all stared at the white-clothed woman and the young man as they questioned one another. Even though he was in the center of a whirlpool and was surrounded by many God King experts, the young man was still calm and cold. The white-clothed woman still had an otherworldly temperament and was as holy as the moon. She said with a calm and gentle voice, "The person who sent us to deliver the message to the illusory Sun Sect is the one you've been waiting for a long time, the one who can save you all." When everyone heard this, they were instantly dumbfounded, revealing expressions of shock and astonishment. "What? The one we've been waiting for a long time, the one who can save us all? Could it be that you're talking about him? Is this true? Are you really talking about that expert?" Although the illusory Sun Sect master and the elders didn't call out that expert's name in tacit agreement, everyone knew the answer in their hearts. Because that answer was the only one. The people of the illusory Sun Sect knew it, and so did the 2 messengers. The 2 messengers were also stunned. They looked at each other in astonishment and then rushed to the palace gate as fast as they could. They took out their communication jade slips to deliver the message. They weren't in a hurry to break out just now because they wanted to find the right opportunity. But now they knew the identity of the white-clothed woman and the young man. They knew that they were messengers sent by the Kenshin. They could no longer remain calm. The most important thing right now was that even if they died here, they had to find a way to deliver this top-secret message and report it to the Celestial King. Kenshin was here. He had already arrived at the firmament continent and had begun to act. His messengers had appeared, and their first goal was to save the illusory Sun Sect. The two messengers were very clear that the value of this top-secret message was more important than their lives. As long as they could deliver the message even if they sacrificed themselves, it would be worth it. However, the white-clothed woman had already expected this result. Before anyone could react, she took out a pair of divine swords and brandished dozens of dazzling sword lights to stop the two messengers. Bang bang bang. As a LV7 divine king, the white-clothed woman had no problem stopping the two messengers at the LV6 divine king realm. With a series of muffled sounds, the sword lights all over the sky exploded into pieces, creating a huge wave in the palace. The two messengers were stopped and their steps to break out of the encirclement stopped. The two messengers weren't injured. After being forced back 10 zhong, they tried to break out of the encirclement again. At this moment the illusory Sun Sect Master and the 9 elders finally acted. Chapter 4272. The news of Kenshin's appearance was so shocking that the illusory Sun Sect Master and the 9 elders were all stunned. But they quickly came back to their senses and realized the seriousness of the problem. It didn't matter if the white-clothed woman and youth were real or fake, or if Kenshin had really appeared. They couldn't hesitate now. They had to stop the two messengers and prevent them from reporting this news to the Celestial King. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Whoosh 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 whoosh. Streaks of sword light and divine technique light drowned the two messengers. At the same time, the Great Elder took the opportunity to cast a spell to open the ceiling array of the Divine Palace. A large array thousands of feet wide lit up and sealed off the entire Divine Palace. The situation in the hall couldn't be seen from the outside. Even if everyone was fighting in the hall, it wouldn't affect the outside. Following a series of dull explosions, turbid 5-colored air waves exploded in the hall. The surrounding pillars, tables, chairs, stone carvings and other objects were all reduced to dust. The entire Divine Palace shook violently. Several large holes appeared in the roof and large cracks appeared in the walls. After all, the shock waves from the battle of so many God King experts were too terrifying. If they were to exchange a few more blows, the entire Divine Palace would probably be destroyed. Fortunately, the two messengers were heavily injured. They fell to the ground and spasmed violently with blood spurting out of their orifices. Their communication jade slips were also shattered. They couldn't send messages anymore. In the smoke and dust, several elders rushed up and were about to kill the two messengers on the spot. But the illusory Sun Sect Master was cautious. He waved his hand and stopped the elders. He only let them capture the two messengers and didn't kill them. When the shockwaves dissipated and the hall calmed down, the illusory Sun Sect Master carefully sized up the white-clothed woman and the cold youth. He asked solemnly, "May I know the names of the two messengers?" The cold youth hugged a divine sword and didn't speak. The white-clothed woman still had a pure and noble temperament. Her voice was gentle and indifferent as she replied, "Names aren't important. You haven't seen or heard of them anyway. You only need to know that we are here to send messages on behalf of that lord. That's enough." The illusory Sun Sect Master frowned. After hesitating for a moment, he shook his head and said, "I'll speak the truth. Please don't take offense. It's because we can't be sure if you can really represent that lord. That's why I'm asking for your names. If you can't tell me the truth, how can I believe you? As the illusory Sun Sect Master, I have the trust and lives of all disciples. How can I believe you so carelessly? If you have any evidence to prove your identity, that would be for the best. And you will regret it, and..." The other messenger also raised his head unyieldingly and roared with resentment, "Didn't anyone tell you that women are all liars? Lying. Least. If you believe her, the entire illusory Sun Sect will be buried with her." Illusory Sun Sect Master and the few elders naturally wouldn't believe these two Celestial King's messengers. But the two messengers' words reminded them. Plus the white-clothed woman's mysterious appearance and strange actions, it was indeed hard for them to believe her. Swoosh. At this moment, the handsome young man who had been cold and silent flashed in front of the two messengers. He raised his sword and swung it down. Swoosh. Swoosh. Two sword glints flashed past and the two messengers spat out blood arrows. Two pieces of their tongues fell onto the ground with a plop. They were no longer able to speak rudely and could only make unclear sounds. Noisy. The handsome young man threw these two words coldly. His figure flashed and he returned to the white-clothed woman's back. Earlier when the two messengers spoke rudely and offended his mother, he really wanted to kill the two messengers. But he was just a low-level god king. How could he kill two sixth-stage realm middle-level god kings in seconds? Moreover, those two messengers couldn't be killed by him. They had to be handed over to Illusory Sun Sect's men to kill. Seeing this, Illusory Sun Sect Master and the few elders frowned as they took a deep look at the cold young man. Although they were all veteran god kings who had been famous for more than 10,000 years and their cultivations were higher than the young man by 6 to 7 levels. But they could deeply feel that although the young man was only at the second level of the god king realm, he had an innate holiness and nobility. He also had a peerless sharp sword intent. That kind of special temperament, suppression and sword intent was simply amazing. Even a peak god king might not have it. They could all guess that this young man's identity must be extremely honorable. Illusory Sun Sect Master was a 9th stage realm god king and his knowledge was even wider. He thought to himself, such a valiant and special sword intent. There are probably less than 5 people in this world who can master it. At this moment, the amiable-looking white-haired elder stared at the cold young man for a moment. Suddenly, his eyes widened and he gave a cry of surprise. Seems like him. This was a sentence that came out of nowhere and was a little baffling. But Illusory Sun Sect Master and the 8 elders, as well as the 2 messengers whose tongues were cut out, after observing the cold young man for a while, they instantly understood what he meant. Instantly, everyone's bodies shook as their eyes widened, revealing a shocked, agitated and disbelieving expression. These God King experts were not fools as they immediately guessed that cold young man's identity. Everyone was enlightened as thoughts such as "so it's like this" and "no wonder" flashed past their minds. That cold young man was a rare peerless talent in this world. If he was that Lord's son, then it wasn't strange at all and it could be explained. The main hall was silent as everyone didn't know what to say. The atmosphere was slightly awkward. At this moment, the white-robed woman took out a palm-sized simple and mysterious token as she waved her hand and threw it in front of Illusory Sun Sect Master. The simple and unadorned black token was made of some unknown material. It actually emitted an icy cold death chi as well as an incomparably sharp sword intent and a divine aura which could suppress heaven and earth. It was already very rare for 3 completely different auras to condense on a token. More importantly, when the token floated in front of Illusory Sun Sect Master, he actually felt a terrifying heavenly might. The back of the token was engraved with mysterious patterns and patterns. There were no words on the front either. There was only a straight, exquisite and simple divine sword pattern. The white-robed woman only gave Illusory Sun Sect Master 2 breaths of time before she took back the token and asked, "Now, do you have any other questions?" Illusory Sun Sect Master understood and so did the 9 elders. It was true. Only Lord Kenshin, who was famous throughout the world and whose might shook the entire god realm, could inject these unique auras and powers into a token. With their intelligence and wisdom, they quickly guessed that the drop-dead gorgeous woman in a white dress and the cold young man before them were most likely the relatives of the Lord Sword God. Chapter 4273. In a short period of time several things had happened and the impact on everyone was too great. First, they learned of Lord Kenshin's appearance. Then they learned of the white-clothed woman and the cold youth's identities. Now the 2 captured messengers' hearts were like dead ashes, and they were filled with despair. As for the Illusory Sun Sect Master and the 9 elders, they experienced the feeling of going from hell to heaven. It was like a dream and they found it hard to believe. Now that things had come to this, they no longer had any doubts. Intense excitement and surprise filled their minds, causing them to smile from ear to ear. However, the white-clothed woman looked at the Illusory Sun Sect Master and said calmly, "Since there are no more doubts, then it's time for you to show your sincerity." The Illusory Sun Sect Master was stunned. After guessing the white-clothed woman and the cold youth's identities, he and the elders' attitudes clearly became much more respectful. What a joke. Those were Lord Kenshin's wife and son. If they didn't act more respectful and leave a bad impression on Lady Kenshin and Little Kenshin, then they would be finished. Seeing that the Illusory Sun Sect Master didn't react, Ji Wuhan, who was tacitly called Little Kenshin by everyone, said 3 words in an indifferent tone. "Show your sincerity." This time the Illusory Sun Sect Master and the elders finally understood what the white-clothed woman meant. Everyone looked at the 2 captured messengers with cold and sharp gazes. The two messengers weren't stupid. They understood Ji Wuhan's meaning and realized that their time of death had come. The two of them struggled with all their might. Since they couldn't speak, they released their soul transmissions and cursed at everyone. Idiots of the illusory sun sect, you will definitely pay 10 times, 100 times the price. The celestial king will definitely avenge us. You damned lowly servant, your death is not to be regretted. The celestial king and the 100,000 soldiers will definitely cut your entire family into pieces. Hearing the two messengers insulting the white-clothed woman, the illusory sun sect master and the elders were filled with indignation and shouted harshly without waiting for Ji Wuhan to speak. You two bastards, how dare you insult? Lord Messenger, I'll kill you right now. Rude bastard, don't be disrespectful to this lord. The illusory sun sect master and several elders had guessed the identity of the white-clothed woman, but since she hadn't pointed it out, they couldn't reveal it. Therefore the strange term "this Lord Messenger" appeared. The illusory sun sect master had already made up his mind to join the Kenshin clan. He didn't want the two messengers to continue spouting nonsense and offend the Kenshin madam and little Kenshin. Therefore, after he berated them, he decisively slashed out 2 saber lights with his palm and killed the two messengers cleanly. Swoosh, swish. Sword light flashed and the heads of the two messengers were cut in half. Their god heads also collapsed. Blood splashed out, about to scatter across the great earth. The 6th elder was a middle-aged woman with a meticulous mind. She was known for her generosity and gentleness in the illusory sun sect. Seeing the two messengers being killed and the scene of blood splattering everywhere, she hurriedly cast a spell and shot out a golden light to collect the 2 pools of blood, so as to prevent it from splashing onto the sword god's wife and the little sword god. Even if Madam and little Kenshin weren't so delicate, they wouldn't necessarily care about their clothes being stained with blood. However, this kind of thing really happened, so it wasn't very nice. The 6th elder's small action indeed attracted the attention of Madam Kenshin. She turned her head and looked at her, a hint of gentleness flashing through her clear eyes. It was obvious that Madam Kenshin admired the 6th elder's attentiveness and thoughtfulness. The illusory sun sect master and several elders were secretly happy when they saw this scene. The 7th, 8th, and 9th elders were also quite envious. 6th elder sister is still the best. The first time we met Madam Kenshin, she was able to obtain Madam Kenshin's approval. Amazing. Soon, the 4 elders collected the corpses of the 2 messengers and the 10 guards and took them out of the hall to deal with them. The reason why the guards weren't allowed to come in and the elders dealt with it personally was for the sake of confidentiality. Another 2 elders stayed behind to clean up the battlefield and repair the damaged divine palace. The illusory sun sect master, 1st elder, and the others personally accompanied Madam Kenshin and little Kenshin as they quietly left the conference hall and headed towards the extremely hidden underground palace. After all, the conference hall was in a mess and really wasn't suitable for receiving guests or discussing important matters. After everyone entered the underground palace, they sat down in a brightly lit, dust-free secret room. There were no guards, servants, or maids here. It could be said to be a place of absolute secrecy. Since there were no outsiders present, they didn't need to be secretive when discussing important matters. They could openly talk about it. The illusory sun sect master and the 3 elders respectfully bowed and formally paid their respects to Madam Kenshin and Ji Wuhan. The 6th elder temporarily acted as a maid and carefully scouted Madam Kenshin and Ji Wuhan, pouring tea and offering fruits to them. After some simple greetings, the illusory sun sect master asked the question that everyone was most concerned about. Lord Messenger, since you were able to enter our sect's territory tonight and help us out in time, you must have understood the situation in advance and know our sect's situation. You and Lord Kenshin should already know that our sect has always maintained a neutral position and hasn't pledged allegiance to Celestial King. After learning that Lord Kenshin is about to arrive and will definitely save the firmament mainland, our sect has been looking forward to it day and night. This subordinate boldly asks, where is the God of Swords at the moment? Has he already arrived at the firmament mainland? This question was very important, because the illusory sun sect master and the elders were all concerned about one thing. Before the 2 messengers died, they said that Battle General Nanfeng was already rushing towards the illusory sun sect with 10,000 elite soldiers. Battle General Nanfeng would launch an attack in 2 days at the latest. Without Kenshin's help, the illusory sun sect wouldn't be able to hold on for long. The white-clothed woman, Madame Kenshin, was Yun Yao. She guessed that the illusory Sun Sect master and the others must be very worried and anxious. In order to reassure everyone, she replied with certainty, Lord Kenshin has already arrived at the firmament mainland and has already started planning and taking action. He has already investigated the situation of the firmament mainland. Lord Kenshin already knows about the intentions of the illusory Sun Sect and the other clans and forces, as well as their determination to fight against the Celestial King. Although Lord Kenshin is rushing over, it will still take him 2 days. In order to reassure everyone, Lord Kenshin sent us here in advance to inform everyone of this news. Hearing that Kenshin was rushing over and would arrive in 2 days, the illusory Sun Sect master and the elders finally showed a relieved expression. A huge stone was finally lifted from their hearts. From Madame Kenshin's tone, it seemed that Kenshin was coming alone to support them. However, the illusory Sun Sect master and the elders had almost blind confidence in Kenshin's strength. In their eyes, even if Kenshin was alone, he could still fight against Battle General Nanfeng and the 10,000 soldiers. Of course, this wasn't blind faith and worship. It was a fact that had been tested. Everyone had heard about the process of Kenshin unifying the boundless heaven mainland and the reincarnation island, as well as his illustrious achievements. Chapter 4274. Since Kenshin was about to arrive at illusory sun-blessed land, illusory Sun Sect's leader and several elders were relieved. If Kenshin could arrive before General Nanfeng attacked illusory sun-blessed land, that would be for the best. Even if Kenshin arrived a day or 2 later, it wouldn't be a big problem. No matter how strong General Nanfeng's 10,000 soldiers were, illusory Sun Sect's 10,000 disciples would be able to hold on for a few days. Now that their biggest worry was solved, illusory Sun Sect's leader and several elders were in a very good mood. Next, they eagerly scouted Yun Yao and Ji Wuhan, and tactfully inquired about Sword God's plans in a roundabout manner. Ji Wuhan kept silent as he didn't want to deal with these people. Yun Yao calmly responded to everyone's probing. She had a good grasp of the situation. Not only did she let everyone guess part of Kenshin's plan, but she didn't say too much. She also kept Kenshin a mystery. All in all, illusory Sun Sect's leader and several elders were overjoyed. They felt proud to be the first to join Kenshin's side. They revered Kenshin more and more. They just wanted to see Kenshin in person as soon as possible to express their respect and loyalty. Just like that, after more than 2 hours of conversation, illusory Sun Sect's leader and several elders were completely convinced. They also completely trusted Yun Yao and Kenshin. Even if Yun Yao took out a heavenly oath, illusory Sun Sect's leader would read it aloud. Of course, Yun Yao wouldn't do that for the time being. This was a more sacred and solemn matter. It was better to wait for Ji Tianqing to come and do it himself. What she was going to do next was another more important matter. Illusory Sun Sect's leader, I found out that illusory Sun Sect has been in close contact with the other 5 forces. These 6 forces have the intention to resist Celestial King's tyranny and help Kenshin save the people of Firmament Land. Is this true? Illusory Sun Sect's leader quickly nodded and said, yes, that's right. Unfortunately, no matter how secretive our actions were, the Celestial King was still aware of it. He used forceful means to suppress us, and even sent a large number of troops to annihilate a force, intending to kill the chicken to warn the monkey. The 5 of us had no choice but to suspend contact and lay low, not daring to show any signs of resistance. But even so, the Celestial King does not intend to let us go. He still wants to force us to submit and surrender. At this point, the leader of the illusory Sun Sect expressed great hatred towards the Celestial King and his lackeys. Of course, he also knew that Mrs. Kenshin was not very interested in these things. She was more interested in information about the other forces. Therefore, he did not express too much emotion and continued, Lord Messenger, although we have not been in contact with the other 4 forces for the past month, we have not been in contact with them. However, their attitude was as firm as ours, and they hated the Celestial King to the core. As long as Lord Kenshin arrived and raised his arm, the other 4 factions would definitely respond immediately. In addition, if you want to know the details of the other 4 forces, this subordinate will introduce them to you now. Yun Yao nodded and said, let's hear it. The illusory Sun Sect master didn't hide anything. He told Yun Yao everything he knew in detail. Yun Yao listened quietly and asked a few questions from time to time. The leader of the illusory Sun Sect also answered truthfully. Just like this, 2 hours later she had a sufficient understanding of the situation of the other four forces. The leader of the Illusory Sun sect gave a very detailed introduction. Not only did he introduce the number of people, the scale of the forces, the number of Divine King experts, and the number of Divine Monarch disciples who could participate in the battle. He also introduced the names of the patriarchs, sect masters and elders of each force clearly, as well as their approximate strength and realm. After Yunyao listened, she expressed her approval of the leader of the Illusory Sun sect's detailed introduction and said that she would report this matter to Kenshin. What she meant now was that the leader of the Illusory Sun sect had done a meritorious service. She would let Kenshin know and reward him in the future. The leader of the Illusory Sun sect was very smart and naturally understood what Yunyao meant. He felt even more grateful and excited. Yunyao thought for a moment and said, "Illusory Sun sect's leader, Lord Kenshin will be arriving soon and will appear soon. The news will also spread. Therefore, the Illusory Sun sect and the other four forces do not need to be on tenterhooks anymore. Quickly send a message to the other four forces and tell them this news. If possible, ask the leaders of the four forces to come to the Illusory Sun Blessed Land as soon as possible and meet Lord Kenshin personally." The leader of the Illusory Sun sect had already guessed that Madame Kenshin would make such a request and was mentally prepared, so he agreed without hesitation. However, he hesitated for a moment and asked tentatively, "Madam Messenger, should this subordinate contact the leaders of the four forces and reveal some information, or?" Yunyao waved her hand and said indifferently, "Just tell them the truth. There is nothing to hide." This subordinate understands. The leader of the Illusory Sun sect let out a sigh of relief. After bowing and receiving the order, he was about to leave. Before leaving, he arranged a place for Yunyao and Ji Wuhan to stay. The sixth elder would take the mother and son to a quiet house. In the next few days, the sixth elder would personally accompany Madame Kenshin. The servants who would serve them would also be the most loyal and reliable female disciples. In short, the leader of the Illusory Sun sect would do his best to take care of Madame Kenshin and little Kenshin. No mistakes could be allowed. This was not only related to his future, but also the survival of the entire Illusory Sun sect. Not long after, the sixth elder brought Yunyao and Ji Wuhan to a certain residence in the mountains to settle down. This house, which occupied a vast area and had a quiet environment, sat alone on a lonely peak. It was used by the Illusory Sun sect to entertain important guests. Very few people lived here. The sixth elder stayed with 10 loyal female disciples, waiting for Yunyao's orders at any time. Of course, Yunyao and Ji Wuhan went back to their own secret rooms and meditated to rest. There was nothing for them to say. In a secret room with dim light and abundant divine power, Yunyao took out a communication jade slip and sent a message to Ji Tianxing. Not only did she have to report the good news to Ji Tianxing and tell him that the Illusory Sun sect had sincerely surrendered to Ji Tianxing, she also had to report the situation of the other four forces to Ji Tianxing. Most importantly, General Nan Feng was leading 10,000 elite soldiers and was on his way to attack the Illusory Sun Blessed Land. This battle would be Ji Tianxing's first battle on the Firmament continent. It was of utmost importance. Many people in the Firmament continent had heard the legends of Kenshin and knew that Kenshin was very powerful. However, they had only heard about it. No one had seen it with their own eyes. And in this battle, Ji Tianxing would let the people of the Illusory Sun sect and the Firmament continent see that the legends about Kenshin were all true. Kenshin's fame was built from fighting with real swords and real swords. His numerous achievements were forged from blood and fire. He definitely deserved his reputation. Chapter 4275. This night many people were destined to be sleepless. For example, the four forces that had been in close contact with the Illusory Sun sect and wanted to resist the Celestial King's rule. Not long ago, they had suddenly received a secret message from the Illusory Sun sect's sect master. For nearly a month they had been filled with anxiety and worry. Although they had very little contact with each other, they knew each other's situation. Especially in the past few days, the patriarchs and sect masters of the four forces knew that the Illusory Sun sect could not hold on. In less than 3 days, news from the Illusory Sun sect would spread. They could either bow their heads and admit defeat, pledging their loyalty to the Celestial King, or they could rise up and completely fall out with the Celestial King and be surrounded by the army. The four patriarchs and sect masters all hoped that the illusory sun sect master could withstand the pressure and not yield to the celestial king. But they could empathize with him and knew how much courage and determination it would take. So, although their hearts were burning with worry, they could not make a decision for the illusory sun sect master. They could only wait anxiously. Just a moment ago, they had suddenly received a secret message from the illusory sun sect master. The moment they received the message jade slip, the four patriarchs and sect masters were stunned. Their expressions became unsightly and their hearts were in their mouths. What did it mean to receive a message from the illusory sun sect master at this time? Had the illusory sun sect master finally made a decision? Had he decided to stubbornly resist to the end, or had he decided to compromise and surrender to the celestial king? The four patriarchs and sect masters were unsure and could not guess the answer. Although they were scattered in different regions and were separated by millions of miles, they had the same feelings and reactions at the same time. Facing the message jade slip from the illusory sun sect master, they all hesitated. After a long silence, they received it and read the contents with their divine senses. Their feelings were very complicated. They wanted to see the answer they wanted, but they were also afraid of seeing the opposite answer. Of course, if the illusory sun sect master really did make the opposite decision, they would not blame or resent him. Because everyone knew that the celestial king was a scourge and they were just a boat in the wild. They could not choose the direction, nor did they have the right to decide whether to advance or retreat. The only thing they could do was go with the flow or perish under the perilous waves. Finally, the voice of the sect master of the illusory sun sect sounded in their minds. After hearing these two sentences, their bodies trembled. Their eyes lit up and the worry and heaviness on their faces were swept away. A moment later, when they finished listening to the contents of the transmission, they were all excited and had an indescribable look of surprise on their faces. Pa! Two clan leaders jumped to their feet, slapped their jade slips on the table in front of them, and couldn't help but say good 3 times in a row. The other 2 sect masters and pavilion masters were holding their communication jade slips with both hands, laughing heartily for a long time before stopping. The custodians and elders immediately asked, what kind of news was it that made them so happy? The patriarchs, sect masters and pavilion masters listened to illusory sun sect masters' orders and naturally wouldn't reveal the secret of Kenshin's arrival. They found some excuses and dismissed the people around them. However, the experts by their side were all their most trusted and valued right-hand men. Naturally, they understood their personalities very well. From their expressions and auras, they could guess that there must be some good news, and it must be related to the illusory sun sect and the celestial king. The patriarchs, sect masters and pavilion masters hesitated for a moment. After careful consideration, they all sent a reply to illusory sun sect master, saying that they would immediately set off for the illusory sun paradise. Then the 4 patriarchs, sect masters and pavilion masters secretly gathered a few confidants to discuss and arrange some things. No one knew what they talked about, but it didn't take long for them to quietly leave the cave residence with 2 custodians or elders. In these 2 days the firmament land was relatively peaceful. Even in the dark where no one knew, there were undercurrents surging. The common people and many forces were talking about Kenshin. But so far the firmament land was not in chaos and no war had broken out. It was just that everyone could sense that a storm was about to come. Everyone believed that war and chaos were not far away. In Tiandu, the celestial king had already received the news. That night, the 2 messengers he sent with 10 guards entered the illusory sun paradise to deliver his order, but they never appeared again. No one knew what happened to the 2 messengers after they entered the illusory sun paradise, or what their current situation was. But just as the 2 messengers said, they did not leave the illusory sun paradise before dawn, which meant that something had happened to them. And there was only one answer, that was, the illusory sun sect was going to rebel. So, in the early morning of the 2nd day, the celestial king received the news from the scouts, and he was immediately furious. Although the celestial king was mentally prepared, the tough illusory sun sect might resist to the end. But he was 80% sure that the illusory sun sect would not dare to act rashly and would obediently surrender. But the result was a slap to his face. He was furious and his killing intent surged. He immediately ordered Battle Marshal Nan Feng. He ordered Battle Marshal Nan Feng to speed up the march, break through the illusory sun paradise as soon as possible, and kill everyone in the illusory sun sect. The reason why he gave such an order was that he was worried that the people of the illusory sun sect would run out of the cave and escape the firmament land. Even if they did not run away, the illusory sun sect would have enough time to breathe, and they could set up more defenses and traps to create trouble for Battle Marshal Nan Feng. Only by ending the battle quickly could he reduce the casualties of the soldiers. Most importantly, the news of the illusory sun sect's rebellion would definitely spread in 2 days. The Celestial King wanted those who received the news to hear that the illusory sun sect was going to rebel, and then they would hear the news of the illusory sun sect's destruction. Only then would it have a strong deterrent effect and create a sensation. He wanted everyone in the firmament land to understand that the result of opposing him and not being loyal to him was destruction. At this moment, Battle Marshal Nan Feng was leading 10,000 soldiers on 5 godly ships towards the south at a moderate speed. He had the same idea as the Celestial King. He believed that the illusory sun sect had an 80% chance of surrendering, and the chances of them rebelling were very low. The 10,000 soldiers he led were just going through the motions to intimidate the illusory sun sect. They would not be of any use. In his opinion, the fact that he had led 10,000 soldiers to destroy a top force was enough to intimidate the illusory sun sect. As long as the illusory sun sect leader was not crazy, he would not take things too hard. However, when Battle Marshal Nan Feng received the Celestial King's order, he was dumbfounded. He never thought that the illusory sun sect would really rebel. Battle Marshal Nan Feng panicked and quickly ordered the fleet to move at full speed. Chapter 4276. Originally, according to the speed of Battle Commander Nan Feng's fleet, they should have reached illusory sun-blessed land in 2 days. However, he had been careless and believed that illusory sun sect would not resist, so the fleet was slower. Even if they rushed at full speed, they would still need 2.5 days to arrive. When he came to this conclusion, Battle Commander Nan Feng felt very uneasy. For others, being half a day later than the time they were ordered wasn't a big deal. However, he knew that the Celestial King had always been strict. If he knew that he had been negligent and delayed by half a day, he would definitely be furious. However, things had already happened and he could not change the outcome. No matter how fast the fleet sped up, they would not be able to reach illusory sun-blessed land in 2 days. Thus, after much consideration, Battle Commander Nan Feng decided to report the truth to the Celestial King and ask for punishment. He had served under the Celestial King for almost 1,000 years and understood the Celestial King's nature very well. He naturally knew that this was the most appropriate thing to do. Furthermore, he was the Celestial King's right-hand man and was deeply trusted and valued. Perhaps the Celestial King would forgive him this time on account of his sincerity and their many years of relationship. After sending the message, Battle Commander Nan Feng anxiously waited for the Celestial King's reply. 15 minutes later, the Celestial King's reply arrived. Just as Battle Commander Nan Feng had expected, the Celestial King was very angry and scolded him harshly. However, on account of his sincerity and many years of hard work, he would not be punished for the time being. He had to atone for his crime and completely eliminate everyone in Illusory Sun sect, leaving no one alive. If he could complete the mission perfectly, not only would the Celestial King not punish him, he would also be rewarded according to his merits. After reading the Celestial King's reply, Battle Commander Nan Feng felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. After putting away the communication jade slip, he did not think about anything else and began to prepare his battle plan. His temperament became cold and austere, and his entire body was filled with a frightening killing intent. Bastards of Illusory Sun sect, there is a path to heaven, but you don't want to take it. Since you insist on seeking death, Ben Shui will fulfill your wish. This time, everyone from the Illusionary Sun sect had to die. Even a chicken or a dog won't be able to survive. Commander Nan Feng held his sword and cursed silently in his heart. Ever since Yun Yao arrived and killed the 2 messengers, the 2 messengers had been killed. The Illusionary Sun sect had already joined the Kenshin Empire and became the first force under the Kenshin Empire. Of course, the only thing missing was the process of swearing allegiance. However, the Illusory Sun sect master and several elders had already considered themselves Kenshin's subordinates. Of course, this news was still confidential. Other than the sect leader and vice-sect leader, the 2 protectors and a few elders, no one else knew about it. The Illusory Sun sect master knew that Kenshin would arrive soon. However, he didn't stay idle. He still had to do the necessary defensive work. Over the past 2 days he had personally commanded the elders and deacons to lead thousands of disciples to reinforce illusory sun-blessed land. After reinforcing the entire Blessed Land's defensive array, he ordered the disciples to set up 2 layers of defensive arrays and 1 layer of sect-protecting array. In addition, he set up a dozen or so arrays near the Blessed Land's entrance to act as traps and ambushes. After doing all this, the illusory sun sect master mobilized the troops and arranged for the elders, deacons, and disciples to set up arrays to firmly guard illusory sun-blessed land. Even the guards guarding the entrance of the blessed land were withdrawn into the interior of the blessed land. In short, the illusory sun sect had finished their preparations and assumed a defensive posture. They were just waiting for Commander Nanfeng to lead his army of 10,000 to attack. The 2 sides were separated by the illusory sun-blessed lands array and began to fight. The illusory sun sect didn't hope to win this battle. They only hoped to block Commander Nanfeng's attack and minimize their casualties. As long as they waited for Kenshin to arrive, the situation would be set. Just like that, 2 days passed quickly. On the morning of the 3rd day, when dawn was about to arrive, the illusory sun sect entered its most tense state. The 5,000 disciples who had the qualifications to participate in the battle were all wearing armor and holding swords. They stood guard at their posts and waited for the battle to begin. The other 3,000 disciples, servants, and workers who didn't have the qualifications to participate were also waiting in the various underground palaces within the sect, worriedly praying. Logically speaking, Commander Nanfeng should have led his army to the Blessed Land's entrance by now. Perhaps in the next moment the army of 10,000 would attack. Everyone's nerves were tense and their hearts were in their mouths. The 2 elders and 8 deacons in charge of controlling the defensive array also pushed the defensive power of the array to its limit. Even the illusory sun sect master didn't stay within the sect to wait for news. Instead, he brought 2 protectors and personally arrived at the Blessed Land's entrance. The 3 of them stood in the night sky and looked down at the disciples near the entrance, waiting with serious expressions. However, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an entire hour passed and there was no reaction from the defensive array. Commander Nanfeng and his army of 10,000 didn't appear on time, let alone attack illusory sun-blessed land. The thousands of disciples didn't dare to relax, but they were very confused. Some of the deacons and elders secretly discussed with each other, but they couldn't make up their minds. In the end, they saw the sect master and the 2 protectors supervising the battle. 2 elders flew into the night sky and asked for instructions from the illusory sun sect master. Lord Sect Master, look, it's already been an hour. Why hasn't there been any movement? Lord Sect Master, in order to preserve our strength and reduce casualties, we didn't leave any scouts or spies outside the Blessed Land. Now that the situation has changed, we can't see what's going on outside. The illusory sun sect master was also puzzled. But in front of thousands of disciples he couldn't show it. He was still calm and replied indifferently, logically speaking, Commander Nanfeng and his army of 10,000 should have arrived by now. However, Commander Nanfeng has been through hundreds of battles and is very experienced. He isn't an impulsive person, so he definitely won't attack rashly. Of course, he has to observe the situation, arrange the troops, and discuss the attack plan. In this way it will take at least a few hours before he attacks. When the 2 elders heard this, they immediately nodded in agreement. But after nodding, the 2 elders asked again, Sect Master, what should we do then? Let the disciples continue to be vigilant and ready to fight at any time? Sect Master, the disciples have been tense and exhausted. I'm afraid it's not good to continue like this. If Commander Nanfeng is cunning enough and deliberately wastes a day or 2 of our time, the disciples will be very tired before they even participate in the battle. The illusory sun sect master also realized this problem and nodded slightly. Right now we are passively defending and the initiative is in Commander Nanfeng's hands. Pass down the order, tell the disciples not to be too nervous and to remain vigilant. Also, if Commander Nanfeng is stalling for time, that's exactly what I want. The longer we delay, the better it is for us. Chapter 4277. The thousands of disciples of the illusory sun sect followed the sect master's orders and remained on guard. At the same time they relaxed a lot. This way everyone felt much more relaxed. At the very least they wouldn't expend too much energy. Time slowly passed. Hour after hour passed. The disciples of the Illusory Sun sect realized that Battle General Nanfeng and his 10,000 soldiers were purposely stalling for time. Since they guessed the other party's scheme, the disciples were certain that they would just have to wait patiently. The elders of the Illusory Sun sect were even more certain that the sect master's judgment was correct. They also believed the sect master's words. If Battle General Nanfeng wanted to stall for time, then so be it. After all, stalling for time would only benefit the Illusory Sun sect. If they could stall for 2 days until Kenshin arrived, that would be even better. At that time, the Illusory Sun sect would not only be able to defend their blessed land, but they would also be able to turn the tables and annihilate Battle General Nanfeng and his 10,000 soldiers. However, while the elders and disciples of the Illusory Sun sect had a good idea, reality didn't go as they wished. In just half a day, Battle General Nanfeng's fleet arrived at the entrance of the Illusory Sun-blessed land. Battle General Nanfeng remembered the Celestial King's orders and didn't dare to be negligent. He had already made a mistake once. How could he make the same mistake a second time? After arriving, he didn't hesitate and immediately ordered his 10,000 soldiers to attack. Although the battleships were traveling at full speed, the 10,000 soldiers were resting on the battleships and didn't lose any combat strength. Furthermore, they had already made preparations before arriving at the Illusory Sun-blessed land. The 5 battleships stopped 1,000 miles away from the Blessed Land's entrance and got into formation, ready to provide support at any time. The 10,000 soldiers also got into formation and attacked under the command of the god generals. Kill. Charge into the Illusory Sun-blessed land and kill everyone from the Illusory Sun sect. Kill them all. Leave no one alive. Kill the traitors. We are invincible. The 20 Divine King Realm generals all swung their swords and sabers, roaring and shouting. The 10,000 soldiers' blood was ignited. They all roared with killing intent and attacked the entrance of the Illusory Sun-blessed land. When they reached the entrance of the blessed land, all of them unleashed their full strength and used all kinds of divine abilities. Colorful lights that covered the sky. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Swish, swish. Divine light flickered all over the sky, and the sharp sound of saber light and sword chi piercing through the air could be heard. Violent gales swept out in all directions, bursting forth with violent air waves. Everything within a radius of 10,000 miles was swept by the storm. The sea of clouds in the sky dissipated and countless mountains and forests began to shake. How terrifying was the combined attack of 10,000 soldiers. The overwhelming 5-colored torrent slammed into the seemingly empty sky, immediately activating the defensive formation of Illusory Sun-blessed land, forming a 5-colored light barrier that covered the sky. Boom! Amidst the deafening explosion, the huge 5-colored light shield trembled violently and flashed with divine light. The first wave of attack from the 10,000 soldiers was also blocked by the defensive formation of Illusory Sun-blessed land. Countless divine spells were shattered into pieces and scattered in the sky. Everyone understood that the Illusory Sun sect had closed the entrance to the Blessed Land. They were planning to hold on until the end. If that was the case, the defensive formation of Illusory Sun-blessed land would definitely be strengthened to its peak. The first attack of the army naturally could not cause any damage to the formation. In fact, even if the army attacked for half a day, they might not be able to break through the defensive formation. In the minds of the soldiers, if they could break through the formation and enter Illusory Sun-blessed land within 16 hours, it would be a great achievement. Under normal circumstances, this army would need at least a day to break through the defensive formation of Illusory Sun-blessed land. After all, the several thousand disciples of the Illusory Sun sect were not to be trifled with. They would not just sit by and watch the enemy attack. As expected, the first wave of attacks from the 10,000 soldiers caused a huge commotion in the defensive formation of Illusory Sun-blessed land. The several thousand disciples of the Illusory Sun sect that had been guarding Illusory Sun-blessed land were immediately alerted. Everyone quivered and immediately became spirited as they entered a state of battle. It's finally here. Commander Nanfeng is really patient. He waited for half a day before attacking. Brothers, it's time to test us. The deacons and elders immediately became spirited, and their gazes and auras became sharp. Everyone was calm and collected as they quickly and calmly gathered divine power and prepared for battle. Several elders also quickly issued orders. instructing the thousands of disciples to join forces to cast spells, increasing the power of the battle formation and transferring power to the defensive formation. Everyone listen up. Use all of your strength to channel energy into the defensive formation and block the attack of Commander Nanfeng's army. Everyone use the battle formation as your team and use all of your strength. Do not let down your guard. Soldiers are trained for 1,000 days to be used in a single moment. The sect has trained everyone for thousands of years. Now that we have reached a moment of life and death, no one is allowed to retreat. Although the disciples of the Illusory Sun sect and the army under Battle Commander Nanfeng's command were separated by a defensive formation and a barrier of alternate dimensions. Before the formation was broken and the entrance to the Blessed Land was opened, the two sides would not be able to meet. However, this was still a battle between two armies and it was a battle to the death. The disciples of the Illusory Sun sect only wanted to live and protect the foundation of the Illusory Sun sect. On the other hand, Commander Nanfeng and his army wanted to destroy the Illusory Sun sect and kill everyone. This was an irreconcilable conflict, and there was still the defensive formation as a buffer. Once Commander Nanfeng's army entered the Illusory Sun Blessed Land, the entire Illusory Sun sect would be bathed in blood and mountains of corpses. Soon, the several thousand disciples of the Illusory Sun sect worked together to channel energy into the defensive formation and increase its power. Outside the Blessed Land, almost 10,000 soldiers launched a second and third wave of attacks with all of their strength. However, they were unable to damage the defensive formation. Not even a crack was left. Commander Nanfeng, who was wearing silver armor and a purple cape, stood in the sky and observed for a moment. Then he frowned and waved his hand to give an order. Not far behind him, the 5 battleships had been waiting to attack. When they finally saw Commander Nanfeng give the order, the 5 battleships impatiently attacked. They unleashed hundreds of fiery pillars of light toward the entrance of the Blessed Land. Boom 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 boom. Hundreds of pillars of divine power streaked across the sky like rainbows and slammed into the 5-colored light barrier, causing earth-shattering explosions. The huge defensive light shield was actually shaking violently from the impact. Divine light burst out and crisp cracking sounds could be heard. Visible to the naked eye, a few fine cracks had appeared on the huge defensive light shield. Even though the cracks on the 5-colored light barrier quickly disappeared and healed, the barrier was still very strong. However, the soldiers saw hope in breaking through the defensive formation. They cheered and attacked even harder. Chapter 4278. The battle had already begun. Even time seemed to slow down. 2 hours finally passed. Battle General Nanfeng didn't attack personally. Instead, he sat in the god battleship and commanded the 10,000 soldiers to attack. The 20 god generals led the 10,000 soldiers and attacked for 2 hours. No one knew how many divine powers they used. The 5 god battleships didn't stop either. They attacked in a rhythmic manner and released more than 100,000 beams of divine power. However, the defensive array of the Illusory Sun Blessed Land kept flashing and shaking violently. Cracks even appeared, but it didn't break. This was within Battle General Nanfeng's expectations. The soldiers didn't panic. They attacked according to plan and were prepared to fight for an entire day. Within the Illusory Sun Blessed Land, the thousands of disciples of the Illusory Sun sect changed from their initial worry to calmness and calmness. After all, the Azure Sky continent had been peaceful for more than 1,000 years. The disciples of the Illusory Sun sect didn't have any experience in war. Plus, they were a bit afraid of the famous Battle General Nanfeng. Therefore, it was inevitable that they were worried at the beginning. However, as time passed, they calmed down. The defensive array was strong enough. The sect master, protectors, and elders were all present. They had nothing to worry about. Based on the current situation, it wouldn't be a problem to stall for another 2 days. According to the rumors circulating in the sect, a mysterious expert would come to support the Illusory Sun sect in a day or 2 to fight against Battle General Nanfeng. As long as the mysterious expert arrived, Battle General Nanfeng would definitely lose. Even though the news was ambiguous and no one knew who the mysterious expert was, the disciples of the Illusory Sun sect were all excited. But when the disciples heard this news, they were all very excited and felt more confident in their hearts. However, the Illusory Sun sect master wasn't as optimistic as the disciples. Although he didn't say anything, his expression and eyes were serious. The disciples couldn't tell, but he knew. The defensive array of the illusory sun-blessed land was only a king-grade high-grade divine array. Even after being strengthened, it was only close to a king-grade high-grade divine array. It wasn't a true king-grade divine array. Based on the current situation, the defensive formation would most likely be broken in another 14 to 14 hours. When that time came, Battle General Nanfeng would lead 10,000 soldiers into the illusory sun-blessed land. The consequences would be unimaginable. Illusory Sun Sect Master didn't believe that the formations and traps he had set up beforehand would be able to stop Battle Marshal Nanfeng's advance. Once the two sides engaged in close combat, the Illusory Sun Sect would definitely suffer a crushing defeat. After hesitating for a long while, he finally made up his mind. He transmitted his voice to the second guardian beside him and asked, "Send a message to the sixth elder and ask him where Madame Kenshin is now and what's his reaction?" The sixth elder was not present at the scene, nor did he participate in the battle. He was still serving Madame Kenshin in the courtyard. When Battle General Nanfeng's army had just launched their attack, the Illusory Sun Sect Master had asked the second protector to send a message to the sixth elder. With the sixth elder's intelligence, he would definitely know what it meant. He would definitely let Madame Kenshin know about it as well. The Illusory Sun Sect Master wanted to see Madame Kenshin's reaction and what instructions she had. Unfortunately, after 2 hours, Madame Kenshin did not appear, nor did she give him any instructions. How could the Illusory Sun Sect Master not be worried and anxious? Therefore, after weighing the pros and cons, he could not help but contact the sixth elder and ask about the situation. The second protector said yes and hurriedly sent a message to the sixth elder. Next, the two could only wait for the sixth elder's reply. At the same time, Yun Yao was currently playing chess with Ji Wuhan under the fire maple tree in the courtyard of her residence. For so many years, Yun Yao had never neglected to teach her children. What she taught was not only the cultivation method of the divine Tao, but also the way of dealing with people and various principles. Just as she had said before, even if Wushuang and Wuhan could not become peak divine kings and reach the top of the world in terms of cultivation, they had to have wisdom and wisdom. They understood the principles of the world and the principles of heaven and earth. Playing chess with Wushuang and Wuhan was actually one of the ways Yun Yao taught them. Both mother and son had heaven-defying looks and extraordinary temperaments. They were also holding the black and white chess pieces respectively. They frowned slightly and seemed to be in deep thought. Accompanied by the fire maple leaves gently falling, this scene appeared especially elegant and tranquil. Even the sixth elder, who had been standing on the side and had not dared to disturb them, inexplicably felt calm and relaxed. Although Madame Kenshin's strength was not at the top, only at the 7th level of the Divine King realm, she was on par with her. But for some reason, standing next to Madame Kenshin, she felt that this place was aloof from worldly affairs and was peaceful and worry-free. Even though she knew that General Nanfeng had arrived and the army was attacking illusory sun-blessed land, she still had the illusion that staying next to Madame Kenshin was incomparably safe. At this moment, a spiritual light flew over from the horizon and landed in front of the sixth elder. She reached out and caught the divine light, and a communication jade slip fell into her palm. Seeing the mark on the jade slip, she knew that it was sent by the second protector and must have been instructed by the sect master. Her divine sense entered the jade slip and quickly read the information inside. After reading it, she thought, as expected. The sixth elder silently put away the jade slip, and on the surface there was no change, pretending that nothing had happened. But in her heart she was somewhat hesitant and nervous. To be honest, she really could not bear to disturb and destroy such a harmonious and beautiful scene in front of her. But the war was urgent, and the survival of the sect was of the utmost importance. He could not turn a blind eye. Just as she was hesitating and thinking about how to speak, Yun Yao broke the silence first and asked, "Is this a message from your sect master?" Yun Yao's voice was very calm and gentle, and it immediately calmed the sixth elder's heart. She was worried about how to speak, but since Madame Kenshin took the initiative to ask, she answered, "Yes." Yun Yao did not stop and continued to play chess. She asked, 2 hours ago General Nanfeng arrived with the army and launched an attack on illusory sun-blessed land. At this time your sect master sent a message to ask you. If I'm not wrong, your sect master should be worried that the defensive formation won't be able to hold on for long and will be broken through by the army. He wants you to ask me when Lord Kenshin will arrive, right? Indeed, this was what the second protector had said to the sixth elder in the jade slip. The sixth elder secretly admired Madame Kenshin's insight and thought, but he did not dare to hide it. He quickly nodded and said, "Lord Messenger, you're indeed able to foresee things like a god. I can't hide anything from you." At this time, Yun Yao's last white chess piece was placed, ending the chess game that had lasted for several hours. Ji Wuhan stared at the chessboard and pondered for 2 breaths of time. Then he came to a sudden realization and said with a sigh, "Mother played so many chess pieces before, but they were all for the sake of setting up the big picture and condensing the momentum. When the momentum was set at the final juncture of life and death, this last chess piece would decide the outcome and reverse the situation. Mother is indeed amazing. This child is ashamed of his inferiority." Chapter 4279. Ji Wuhan was only talking about the chess game. Yun Yao was teaching Ji Wuhan some principles and strategies through this game of chess. When sixth elder heard Ji Wuhan's words, she became pensive and understood the reasoning behind it. She was meticulous and naturally understood that this game of chess between mother and son was actually the answer Madame Kenshin wanted to tell Mirage Sun sect. So many days of planning and preparation had been for the sake of waiting for the final chess piece to decide victory and defeat. That chess piece that could turn the tides and determine victory was undoubtedly Kenshin. Since the game was set and the moment to decide victory and defeat had arrived, Kenshin should be arriving soon. Reality proved that sixth elder's guess was correct. Yun Yao picked up a cup of spirit tea and took a sip before saying, "Tell your sect master that Lord Kenshin will arrive within 6 hours. Tell the disciples of Mirage Sun sect to make preparations and join forces with Lord Kenshin. We'll attack from both inside and outside and take advantage of the situation to annihilate Battle General Nan Feng and his troops." Sixth elder's spirits shook when she finally received a definite answer. She was filled with joy and anticipation. She hurriedly bowed to Yun Yao to express her obedience and then sent a reply to Second Guardian. Second Guardian also trembled when he received the message. His face was full of joy as he hurriedly reported it to Mirage Sun Sect's sect master. When Mirage Sun Sect's sect master learned that Kenshin would arrive within 4 hours, he immediately let out a sigh of relief. A large stone had been lifted from his heart. He hurriedly ordered the guardians, elders and deacons to make preparations. As soon as Lord Kenshin arrived and attacked Battle General Nanfeng's army from the outside, all of Mirage Sun Sect's disciples were to charge out bravely and cooperate with Kenshin from both inside and outside. At that time, Battle General Nanfeng's soldiers would be attacked from both inside and outside. They would definitely be routed and completely defeated. This was the first time the people of Mirage Sun Sect had seen Kenshin with their own eyes. It was also the first time the two sides worked together to deal with an army of 10,000. Illusory Sun Sect master made up his mind. He had to use this opportunity to perform well and leave a good impression on Kenshin. This matter could not be messed up. If Kenshin was disappointed in the Illusory Sun Sect, then the Illusory Sun Sect would have a hard time in the future. The two guardians, the numerous elders and the deacons were also in high spirits when they received the order. They were filled with excitement and anticipation. They could empathize with the sect master's feelings and had the same thoughts. Therefore they were all very active in preparing for the battle. The battle between the two armies was still ongoing. One side was desperately attacking the defensive array, while the other side was casting spells with all their might to increase the defensive array's power. Illusory Sun-Blessed Land's defensive formation was stuck in the middle, enduring the fiercest bombardment. Divine light burst out, cracks appeared on its surface, but they were repaired again and again. As the attacks of Battle General Nanfeng's army grew more and more ferocious, the rate at which cracks appeared on the defensive formation grew faster and faster. The self-healing and repairing speed of the formation was gradually unable to keep up with the speed of destruction. More and more cracks appeared on the surface of the formation, and its power was gradually draining away. Even if the disciples of the Illusory Sun Sect did their best and poured more divine power into the defensive formation, it would still be difficult to alleviate this situation. There was nothing that could be done. This was an inevitable outcome. Based on the current situation, the defensive formation would probably completely collapse in another 12 to 14 hours. However, the thousands of disciples of the Illusory Sun Sect were not worried about this. They had all received the orders from the deacons. They would only be able to hold on for another 4 hours at most before the mysterious expert's reinforcements arrived. At that time, the mysterious expert would launch a surprise attack from the rear of Battle General Nanfeng's army. They only needed to charge out of the illusory sun-blessed land and coordinate with the mysterious expert to surround Battle General Nanfeng's army. The illusory sun sect only had a few thousand disciples, and their overall strength was weaker than Battle General Nanfeng's army of 10,000. However, when they thought about how they had the help of the mysterious expert and how confident the elders and deacons were, they dispelled their worries. In the eyes of the thousands of disciples, victory would definitely belong to the illusory sun sect as long as they obeyed the deacons' orders. Of course, while they were excited and expectant, many disciples were also very confused. They silently guessed who the mysterious expert was. Unknowingly, 2 hours passed. The defensive formation of the illusory sun-blessed land was already covered in cracks. At this time, the army under Battle General Nanfeng's command sped up their attacks, and their firepower became even fiercer. It was obvious that Battle General Nanfeng was very dissatisfied with the efficiency of the army's attacks after seeing how little they had achieved after attacking for a few hours. Under his orders, the army of 10,000 had no choice but to use all their strength and attack without holding back. At the entrance of the blessed land, everything within 20,000 miles was illuminated by a blinding divine light. A hurricane was blowing between the heavens and the earth, and there were constant shockwaves of divine power carrying fragments of divine light that swept in all directions. The surrounding forests had long since disappeared. Even the mountains and rivers had been flattened and turned into yellow sand. Right at this moment, a giant battleship that was still invisible rapidly approached from 100,000 miles away. This mysterious battleship that had come from afar was Ji Tianxing's god-slaying battleship. While he was rushing to the illusory sun-blessed land, he would contact Yunyao every day to learn about the latest situation. When Yunyao told him that Battle General Nanfeng had arrived at the illusory sun-blessed land with 10,000 soldiers and was about to attack, he sped up. The sect master of the illusory sun sect thought that this was the first time he had met him, so he decided to perform well. Ji Tianxing was also thinking that this was his first battle in the firmament continent. He had to win beautifully and brilliantly in order to shock the firmament continent and make a name for himself. In this battle he had to fight with the strongest, most domineering and most invincible momentum to shock the celestial king and his subordinates. At the same time, it would increase the confidence of the neutral forces on the firmament continent. This would be a great help to him in conquering the firmament continent in the future. It would be difficult for him to achieve such an effect by himself. Even if he could kill Battle General Nanfeng and his Divine King Realm generals, he would not be able to wipe out the 10,000 soldiers. He needed the cooperation of the disciples of the illusory sun sect. The two sides worked together to achieve this result. Therefore, he had to rush to the illusory sun-blessed land as soon as possible to ensure that the disciples of the illusory sun sect would be fine. If he was late, Battle General Nanfeng's army would have already broken through the illusory sun-blessed land and killed many disciples of the illusory sun sect. Then even if he arrived and helped the illusory sun sect turn the tables and defeat Battle General Nanfeng, the effect would be greatly reduced. Even though he was still 100,000 miles away, Ji Tianxing could see clearly that there was a land covered by divine light in the distance. He could also hear muffled rumbling sounds. He scanned with his divine sense and saw the entrance of the illusory sun-blessed land. Almost 10,000 soldiers formed 5 square formations and were continuously attacking the entrance of the blessed land. There were also 5 divine warships in the sky. They were arranged in a triangle formation and were also releasing fierce and violent light beams to attack the defensive formation of the illusory sun-blessed land. The defensive formation of the illusory sun-blessed land was already full of cracks and holes. Chapter 4280. Although the defensive formation of illusory sun-blessed land would have been destroyed in a few hours. But from the looks of it, Battle Marshal Nanfeng's army had yet to break through the formation, and there were no casualties among the illusory sun sect's disciples. Ji Tianxing let out a sigh of relief and ordered White Dragon to slow down and approach the Blessed Land's entrance. Since the first step of his plan had been realized, the next step was to work with illusory sun sect and destroy Battle Marshal Nanfeng's army. The god-slaying warship that remained invisible stopped 20,000 miles away from Battle Marshal Nanfeng's fleet. White Dragon followed his master's instructions and hovered the warship in the sky, waiting for the right time to attack. His goal was to destroy the 5 battleships as quickly as possible. After all, when the battle started and Battle Marshal Nanfeng's army was defeated, it was very likely that they would escape on the god-slaying warship. It would be very troublesome to chase after them then. If he could destroy the 5 warships before the battle started and cut off Battle Marshal Nanfeng's army's escape route, it would be best. Meanwhile, Ji Tianxing quietly left the god-slaying warship and flew towards Battle Marshal Nanfeng's army. Just like the god-slaying warship, he remained invisible and hid his presence. Battle Marshal Nanfeng's army could not detect him and the warship at all. The only person who could see the god-slaying warship was the 9th-level Divine King Realm Battle Marshal Nanfeng. However, the god-slaying warship was 20,000 miles away from him. Also, Ji Tianxing believed that Battle Marshal Nanfeng's attention would be on the defensive formation of illusory sun-blessed land and would not be on guard against reinforcements. Reality proved that Ji Tianxing's guess was correct. Battle Marshal Nanfeng had never thought that a mysterious expert would come to reinforce Illusory Sun Sect. In his mind, the ones most likely to reinforce Illusory Sun Sect were the other 4 ancient clans and sections. If the 4 forces were to come, they would definitely fly over in a few battleships carrying thousands of disciples in a grandiose manner. With his strength, he would definitely be able to discover the other party from 100,000 miles away. At this time, he saw that his army had not made any progress in attacking Illusory Sun-blessed land's entrance for several hours. He was slightly anxious and impatient. He wanted to destroy Illusory Sun Sect as quickly as possible to appease the Celestial King and reward him. Therefore, he was concentrating on observing the defensive formation, looking for its weak points and loopholes. As long as they could find the flaws in the formation and have the army focus their attacks, they would be able to destroy it in one fell swoop. Ji Tianxing quietly approached Battle Marshal Nanfeng's fleet and secretly released his consciousness to check the situation inside the 5 battleships. Just as he had expected, the 5 battleships only had a few dozen highly skilled martial artists operating the divine warships. The army of 10,000 soldiers had come out in full force and were attacking the defensive formation. The commander of the army was in the battleship at the very front and was focused on studying the defensive array. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing was certain that this was the best time to make a move, so he decisively did 2 things. He took out his communication jade slip and sent a message to Yun Yao. When the communication jade slip flew into the sky, it lit up with white light and disappeared in a flash. He then used 100% of his power and used his ultimate divine ability. Swish. Inside the warship, Commander Nanfeng noticed the white light from the communication jade slip. This was unavoidable. Commander Nanfeng was instantly awakened. He instinctively released his consciousness and covered a radius of tens of thousands of miles to check the situation. He did not discover the god-slaying battleship or Ji Tianxing. However, he had a strong premonition that he was in great danger. Out of caution and instinct, he did not hesitate to give the order for the army of 10,000 to stop attacking. He also summoned 20 divine generals to search the surroundings. However, just as he gave the order, Ji Tianxing also used his ultimate divine ability. Sword Rain. Suddenly, 90,000 silver light spots lit up in the sky and poured down like a meteor shower. In the blink of an eye, the 90,000 silver light spots were right in front of them. They had the power to destroy heaven and earth and covered a radius of 20,000 miles. It was only then that the army of 10,000 was awakened. They all stopped attacking and looked up at the sky. When everyone saw clearly that the meteor shower falling from the sky was 90,000 starry giant swords, they all revealed shocked and panicked expressions and eyes. Unfortunately, before Battle Marshal Nanfeng could give the order and before the army of 10,000 could disperse or escape, the sword rain fell from the sky. Boom, boom, boom. In the next instant, the area of 20,000 miles was flooded by the starry giant swords. Countless starry giant swords struck the 5 divine warships and the army of 10,000, creating earth-shattering explosions. The entire area was flooded by starlight. It was chaos. Following the explosion, the 5 divine warships were smashed into the ruins by the starry giant swords. They flashed with divine light and countless pieces of metal flew out. These 5 divine warships were of a higher grade and had powerful defenses. They were not directly destroyed by the starry giant swords, but they were still severely damaged. As for the army of 10,000 divine lords, They were unable to withstand the starry giant swords and suffered heavy casualties. Countless people were smashed into meat paste by the starry giant swords. Blood rained down from the sky. The army screamed in pain. Their dying cries were drowned out by the loud explosions. Commander Nan Feng and the 20 God King generals finally came to their senses. They were shocked and furious. They used all their divine abilities to block the starry giant swords. However, those mid-divine kings and low-divine kings were also injured to varying degrees. When the starry giant swords landed on the ground, they even formed a sword formation that spanned 20,000 miles. Tens of thousands of starry giant swords weaved and weaved, forming a huge sword net. They violently tore apart everything within 20,000 miles. The soldiers who were injured but not dead were all ground to dust by the starry giant swords. At the same time, Bai Long, who had been waiting for this moment, controlled the god-slaying warship to unleash its most powerful cannon fire. 600 terrifying beams of light slammed into the 5 damaged divine warships on the ground. With a loud rumble, the 5 divine warships were blasted to pieces. The ground was littered with wreckage and fragments. The dozens of experts controlling the divine warships were also killed by the god-slaying warship. Those who were lucky enough to survive were ground to dust by the starry giant swords as soon as they crawled out of the wreckage of the divine warships. Just like that, Ji Tianxing destroyed Battle Marshal Nanfeng's 5 divine warships and slaughtered more than 3,000 soldiers with a single divine ability. The Illusory Sun Sect Master, who had been guarding Illusory Sun-blessed ground and waiting for Kenshin's arrival, decisively gave the order to attack. The defensive formation that the army had been attacking for several hours had opened by itself. The Illusory Sun Sect Master and the 2 enforcers charged out of Illusory Sun-blessed ground. Several thousand Illusory Sun Sect disciples followed behind them as they charged towards Battle Marshal Nanfeng's subordinates. Kill. Charge. It's time to counterattack. The Illusory Sun Sect disciples shouted and roared. They were excited and filled with killing intent. However, when they charged out of Illusory Sun-blessed ground and saw the scene in front of them, they were shocked beyond belief. The Apex. Chapter 4281. The area of 20,000 miles around the Blessed Land's entrance had turned into a sea of starlight. Tens of thousands of stellar swords enveloped the area, forming a huge spherical sword net that sealed off the soldiers under Battle General Nan Feng. Countless stellar swords danced in the air like lightning, desperately killing the soldiers under Battle General Nan Feng. The Illusory Sun Sect disciples saw with their own eyes that Divine Lord Realm experts after Divine Lord Realm experts were cut to pieces by the stellar swords. The same thought appeared in the minds of all the Illusory Sun Sect disciples. What kind of sword array is this? Its power is actually so terrifying. Setting up such a powerful sword array must have taken a long time, right? Is this the technique of that mysterious expert? But how did he set up this sword array without being discovered by Battle General Nan Feng? The thousands of disciples were perplexed, feeling that this was too inconceivable. As for the deacons, elders, and protectors of the Illusory Sun Sect, they were even more shocked and pleasantly surprised. They were Divine King experts, so they naturally knew that although this sword array was an array, it was not the kind that required time to set up. Instead, it was a divine ability, a secret art that could instantly condense into a sword array. In fact, many Divine King experts had grasped similar divine abilities. But such divine abilities had a common problem, which was that they resembled an array, but did not have the power of an array. They were usually just looks. And this huge sword array was clearly not the kind that looked good but was useless. The lethality of this sword array was so terrifying that in just 3 short breaths, it had reduced the number of soldiers under Battle General Nanfeng's command by about 30%. In other words, Lord Kenshin only used this divine ability and secret art to quickly annihilate over 3,000 soldiers. What kind of terrifying technique was this? Before this, they had all heard of the legends of Kenshin, his powerful techniques and sword arts. But their knowledge was limited. It was hard for them to imagine just how powerful Kenshin was. Now that they saw Kenshin annihilating 3,000 divine lords with one move, they finally realized that Kenshin was actually this powerful. It was just too terrifying. While the tens of thousands of stellar swords were still killing the army under Battle General Nan Feng, the thousands of Illusory Sun Sect disciples could only stop. They could not rashly participate in the battle or they would be affected. Fortunately, after 3 breaths, the tens of thousands of stellar swords disappeared. The incomparably sharp sword intent and the raging strength chi were also slowly dissipating. The illusory sun sect master finally regained his wits. He waved his hand again and gave the order to attack. The thousands of illusory sun sect disciples seemed to have woken up from their daze. At this moment the 6,000 soldiers under General Nanfeng's command had yet to recover from their shock, and their formation was in chaos. Calm. However, they had just been crushed by the stellar sword. Most of them were injured and covered in blood. The 20 divine generals could only calm themselves down and order the army to get into formation. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Whoosh 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 whoosh. The thousands of illusory sun sect disciples had already arrived. They released divine arts that covered the sky and poured down on the army under General Nanfeng's command. The 6,000 army ignored their injuries and got into formation. They were just about to cast their divine arts to meet the enemy. Right at this moment, Ji Tianxing suddenly appeared in the sky, openly showing himself. He looked down at General Nanfeng's army with a cold expression. He used the dragon elephant divine fist with his left hand and the burial of heaven with his right hand, slashing out dozens of sword lights. His appearance stunned the 10,000 people on both sides for a moment. Countless gazes gathered on him. Even Commander Nanfeng frowned and carefully sized him up. The 6,000 army thought, is it this white-robed young man who used the sword array to attack us? Heavens! He's alone, but he can use such a terrifying divine art? Who is he? The thousands of illusory sun sect disciples thought the same, but they didn't feel fear. Instead they felt admiration and gratitude toward the white-robed young man. The illusory sun sect master, the elders, and the deacons all had the same thought when they saw Ji Tianxing's appearance. This is the legendary Kenshin. He is indeed wise, divine and extraordinary. No wonder little Kenshin looks so similar to him and has such an extraordinary temperament. At this moment, some of the divine generals under General Nanfeng suddenly recognized Ji Tianxing and couldn't help but exclaim, "Hey! He's Kenshin! Heavens! Why is Kenshin here? When did he come?" The divine generals only exclaimed subconsciously, but the 10,000 people on the battlefield were in an uproar. After a short moment of shock, the armies and disciples on both sides burst into different voices. The 6,000 soldiers were in an uproar. They looked at Ji Tianxing with eyes full of fear and shock. The morale they had gathered with great difficulty instantly collapsed. They finally understood why the white-robed young man was able to beat them to such a miserable state with only one divine art. It was because he was the legendary Kenshin. The thousands of disciples of the illusory sun sect finally understood after hearing the two words Kenshin. This was the mysterious expert that the sect master and the elders were talking about. All the disciples burst into cheers and applause. Many of them were even shouting the name of the sword god. Their expressions were especially excited and moved. Boom boom boom. At the same time, the mountain-sized dragon elephant fist shadows and dozens of destructive sword lights landed in the middle of the 6,000 soldiers' formation, creating earth-shattering explosions. Hundreds of soldiers were smashed into meat paste by the dragon elephant divine fist shadows and cut into pieces by the dozens of sword lights. The snow and corpses that filled the sky woke everyone up. They all realized that this was a critical moment of life and death. How could they be distracted? Thus, the disciples of the illusory sun sect attacked again. The soldiers under General Nanfeng's command had lost their will to fight. They could only defend themselves while fleeing into the distance. If they were only facing the thousands of disciples of the illusory sun sect, they still had the confidence to fight. But Kenshin had appeared. Even if Kenshin was alone, he could destroy all of them. Thus, everyone had the thought of running away. They didn't want to continue fighting. Even General Nanfeng was filled with fear and despair after recognizing Kenshin. He knew that he wasn't Kenshin's match. Staying to fight would only lead to death. Thus he could only order his soldiers to retreat. At the same time, he had to report the news of Kenshin's appearance to the Celestial King immediately. It didn't matter even if he died here. He had to let the Celestial King know immediately so that he could take precautions. Chapter 4282. Commander Nanfeng was still calm and knew the severity of the situation. But unfortunately, Ji Tianxing had been watching him for a long time and guessed what he would do. Commander Nanfeng had just taken out his communication jade slip when a sharp sword light shot down from the sky. It was like a flash of lightning as it attacked his palm. Gotcha! Luckily, Commander Nanfeng was alert and dodged quickly. He was not hit by the sword light and saved his palm. But the communication jade slip in his hand was destroyed by the sword light and exploded into dozens of pieces. Commander Nanfeng broke out in cold sweat. Only now did he know that Kenshin's divine sense had locked onto him. No matter what he did, he would not be able to escape Kenshin's surveillance. This undoubtedly meant that Kenshin would definitely defeat him today. No matter what, he would not be able to escape Kenshin's attack. This feeling of being stabbed in the back made Commander Nanfeng feel extremely pressured. He was panicking and cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He gave up on the idea of sending a message to the Celestial King and hurriedly waved his divine sword to join the battle against Illusory Sun Sect Master. Illusory Sun Sect Master and Commander Nanfeng were similar in strength. They were both 9th level Divine King realm. The difference was that Illusory Sun Sect Master was over 20,000 years old. He had cultivated for a very long time and had accumulated a lot of power. On the other hand, Commander Nanfeng was younger with a lifespan of less than 8,000 years. Both of them had different natures and the abilities they cultivated were also different. One was calm and experienced with a long aura like an old turtle. The other was as sharp as a blade. He was aggressive and showed off his ability. The two of them fought in the sky and were evenly matched. It was especially exciting and the victor could not be determined in a short time. Most of the 20 god generals under Commander Nanfeng were intermediate god kings. There were 6 7th heaven realm upper god kings and a few 3rd heaven realm lower god kings. Illusory Sun Sect only had 2 guardians and 5 elders who were upper god kings. There were also 2 elders and 6 deacons who were intermediate god kings. As for lower god kings, Illusory Sun Sect only had 6. In comparison, Illusory Sun Sect's overall strength was slightly weaker. But the previous sword rain had caused Commander Nanfeng's soldiers to suffer heavy casualties. Many of the god generals had also suffered heavy injuries. Hence, both sides' Divine King powerhouses were actually evenly matched when they launched a chaotic battle. The biggest difference between the two sides was the number of soldiers and Illusory Sun Sect disciples. Originally, Battle Marshal Nanfeng had 5,000 more soldiers under his command than the Illusory Sun Sect. Now more than 3,000 soldiers were killed by the rain of swords, and more than 1,000 were seriously injured. In addition, when the surviving soldiers knew that the Kenshin was here, they were terrified and their combat strength was greatly reduced. As a result, the soldiers under Commander Nanfeng's command were unable to gain the upper hand and were forced to retreat. Seeing this situation, Commander Nanfeng and his god generals felt despair. At the same time, their fear and respect for Kenshin grew. Look, this is the deterrence of Kenshin. Originally, they had an absolute advantage against the Illusory Sun Sect, but because of Kenshin's appearance, it had actually become a disadvantage. Time passed quietly. The army under General Nanfeng's command had been entangled by the disciples of the Illusory Sun Sect this entire time. Even their retreat had become extremely slow. After a full 15 minutes, the army had only retreated 1,000 kilometers. In order to retreat 1,000 kilometers, they had paid with the lives of another 3,000 people. Originally, with Kenshin's transcendent status and strength, there was no need for him to personally participate in this chaotic battle. However, in order to end the battle as quickly as possible and reduce the casualties of the Illusory Sun Sect, as well as to prevent any accidents from happening and allowing the enemy to escape, he had personally taken action. His left hand unleashed all kinds of divine abilities while his right hand swung the Sword of Burial of Heaven. Sword lights filled the sky as he attacked the enemies in the chaotic battle formation. Almost every time he used a divine ability, he could kill dozens of divine lords under Commander Nanfeng's command. Those elite experts, as long as they encountered his divine ability, were not lucky enough to escape. They were all smashed into pieces and turned into ashes. More than half of the 3,000 people who were killed by his sword. Fortunately, the two sides were engaged in a chaotic battle. Almost 10,000 people were mixed together and it was difficult to distinguish between them. When Ji Tianxing attacked, he had to accurately lock onto the enemy and not accidentally injure the disciples of the Illusory Sun Sect. If the two sides were in formation and distance, Ji Tianxing could kill the enemy even faster. Just like before when he used that sword rain to kill more than 3,000 people in 3 breaths. Inside the Illusory Sun-blessed land. In an elegant and unique courtyard, Yun Yao and Ji Wuhan were still playing chess under the fire maple tree. The sixth elder had not left and was still standing at the side. After placing the chess piece, Yun Yao glanced at Ji Wuhan and asked, "Wuhan, although you are very calm and collected, I can still see that you want to go out and participate in the battle, right?" Ji Wuhan's thoughts were seen through by his mother, but he did not feel embarrassed. He nodded very frankly and said, "Mother, although father is very strong and does not fear any expert in the immortal realm, General Nanfeng has 10,000 troops. However, General Nanfeng has 10,000 soldiers under his command while father is alone. I'm still worried. Moreover, I am already a low-level divine king and have mastered many divine abilities and secret techniques. I really want to use this battle to test my combat strength." The sixth elder had long been mentally prepared and knew that the two nobles in front of her were the wife and son of Lord Kenshin. However, when she heard the conversation between Ji Wuhan and Yun Yao, she still felt somewhat excited. Of course, she also had the same concerns and worries. She was very worried about the safety of the Illusory Sun sect master, the elders and the disciples. However, she had a mission and had to serve Madame Kenshin, so she could not leave. Yun Yao nodded slightly and said to Ji Wuhan, "Actually, you still don't know your father well enough. You also don't know what I went through with him back then. Therefore, it is normal for you to be worried about his safety. However, I have enough confidence in your father. It is only an army of 10,000, it is just a small matter. Sometimes your father does not really need our help. What he needs more is for us to be safe and sound. As long as we don't become his weakness, he is invincible." When Yun Yao said this, many scenes appeared in her mind. She also recalled the dangers and killings that Ji Tianxing had gone through in order to save her. In fact, she had always known that Ji Tianxing was tough enough, strong enough and talented enough. However, he had a fatal flaw which was also his only weakness. That was his family and friends. If the enemy could not deal with him and turned to deal with his family and friends, he would definitely save them at all costs. In this kind of situation, he would not be able to be as calm and restrained as usual, and would often fall into dangerous situations. Ji Wuhan was very smart and immediately understood his mother's meaning. With his strength, if he participated in the battle at the Blessed Land's entrance, any two mid-level divine kings would be able to threaten his life or even capture him. If the enemy used his life as a hostage, his father would definitely be in a very passive position. The Apex. Chapter 4283. Since he understood his mother's intentions, Ji Wuhan was no longer in a hurry. He patiently waited for the good news of his father's triumphant return. The sixth elder looked at Yun Yao with bright eyes, looking pensive. No one knew what she was thinking. She seemed to be envious of Madame Kenshin. She was also curious about what Madame Kenshin and Kenshin had gone through back then. It must be a very exciting and legendary story, right? Unknowingly, an hour had passed. Ji Wuhan was somewhat absent-minded at the beginning of this game. His condition wasn't good, so he ended the game early. The result was self-evident. This cold genius lost to his mother as usual. Yun Yao put away the chess pieces and slowly stood up. She said, "Looking at the time, the battle should be over. Let's go and take a look." Ji Wuhan immediately became spirited. His eyes lit up and he hurriedly nodded in agreement. Afterward, the mother and son left the house and flew toward the exit of Illusory Sun Paradise. The sixth elder followed closely. His heart was also filled with anticipation. He wanted to see the result of the battle. With Kenshin's help, Illusory Sun sect would definitely win. There was no doubt about it. However, the sixth elder really wanted to know how Illusory Sun sect would win. Beating the enemy until they threw away their armor and fled in a sorry state was also a victory. However, in comparison, it was definitely not as shocking as completely annihilating the enemy. Not a single one escaped. Although the latter victory was very difficult, the sixth elder still had hope. Soon Yun Yao and the other two left Illusory Sun Paradise and arrived at the battlefield. At the entrance of the paradise, everything within a radius of 50,000 miles was in ruins. At a glance, it was all scorched earth and yellow sand. The mountains, rivers and forests from before had all disappeared. Just as Yun Yao expected, the battle on the battlefield had already ended. The result was also just as she said. Kenshin's Illusory Sun sect had won. Looking around, there were at least several thousand people in the ruins. Most of them were dressed in rags and looked rather miserable. If one looked carefully, They would discover that those who had suffered light or heavy injuries and looked very miserable were all Illusory Sun sect disciples. Moreover, everyone was elated and their spirits were high. Their faces were brimming with pride and a victorious smile. Of the thousands of Illusory Sun sect disciples, some were cleaning up the battlefield, collecting the weapons, armor fragments and corpses on the ground, some were treating their fellow disciples, and some were treating their wounds. Under the command of more than a dozen deacons, the disciples worked in an orderly manner. In the distant sky, a few elders and 2 protectors of the Illusory Sun sect, as well as the master of the Illusory Sun sect, gathered around a white-robed young man. They bowed towards him with smiles on their faces as they chatted about something. The 6th elder looked around the battlefield and only saw his fellow disciples. He didn't find a single enemy. Even General Nan Feng, the strongest of the enemy forces, was nowhere to be seen. This made the 6th elder somewhat puzzled. He thought to himself, the battle ended so quickly? What about General Nan Feng's army? Were they all killed? Or did he run away? With this thought in mind, the 6th elder followed Yun Yao and Ji Wuhan and flew forward. When they approached the master of the Illusory Sun sect and the elders, the 2nd protector hurriedly transmitted a message to everyone. Madam Kenshin and little Kenshin have arrived. The master of the Illusory Sun sect and the elders who were flattering and expressing their loyalty to Ji Tianxing hurriedly stopped and turned to look at Yun Yao and the others. Although Yun Yao hadn't revealed her identity before, everyone knew who she was. Seeing her and Ji Wuhan arrive, the master of the Illusory Sun sect and the elders bowed in unison and said, "Greetings, Lord Messenger." They were also very smart. They paid their respects to the Sword God's wife, but did not mention their identities. Yun Yao nodded slightly and raised her hand to indicate that everyone could dispense with the formalities. Then she walked towards Ji Tianxing. Seeing that Ji Tianxing was safe and sound and that there wasn't even a trace of blood left on his body, she smiled and looked at him with concern. Ji Tianxing didn't say much. He returned her a look that said, "Don't worry, there's no problem." The husband and wife had a tacit understanding. They didn't need to speak at all. They could communicate with their eyes alone. At this moment, the master of the Illusory Sun sect beckoned to the 6th elder and said, "6th elder, quickly come and greet Lord Kenshin." The 6th elder had been standing behind Yun Yao and Ji Wuhan all this time, sizing up Kenshin rather curiously. When she heard the sect master's call, she hurriedly stepped forward and bowed to Ji Tianxing. She said respectfully, "This subordinate pays her respects to Lord Kenshin." She really wanted to say that Lord Kenshin was even younger and more handsome than she had imagined. It was really unbelievable. However, everyone was present, including Madam Kenshin and little Kenshin, so she didn't dare to say too much. Indeed, in the many rumors in the God realm, Kenshin was decisive, powerful, cold, and merciless. He was an out-and-out god of slaughter. As for his image, most of them described him as fierce, domineering, cold, and so on. This made many people who hadn't seen him before mistakenly think that he was a ferocious-looking person who looked very sinister and cold at first glance. However, in reality, his true appearance was excessively handsome. He had a domineering aura and also a sacred and dignified appearance. He didn't look like an evil and bloodthirsty person at all. At this moment, Ji Wuhan looked around and didn't see Battle General Nan Feng's subordinates. He asked, "Father, where's Battle General Nan Feng's army? Were they all annihilated by you?" Ji Tianxing nodded. The Illusory Sun sect master hurriedly explained, "Young master, Battle General Nan Feng's army of 10,000, more than 6,000 were killed by Lord Kenshin. It's a pity that you didn't see with your own eyes how terrified and despairing those fellows were when they saw Lord Kenshin appear. Lord Kenshin was simply invincible on the battlefield. He killed the enemy as if he were chopping vegetables." This calm and experienced old sect master's hair was a bit messy, and the bloodstains on his robes had yet to dissipate. However, he didn't care about his image at all and only cared about flattering. In truth, Ji Wuhan wasn't the least bit interested in this old sect master, nor did he want to talk to him. Given his nature, he didn't like this kind of shrewd old fox who took advantage of every opportunity to strike. However, he was more concerned about the results of the battle and couldn't help but ask, "No one escaped, right? What about Battle General Nan Feng? Was he killed as well?" The Illusory Sun sect master nodded again and said with a beaming smile, "Of course. Battle General Nan Feng might be awe-inspiring and famous, But he didn't even last 3 moves under Lord Kenshin's sword before he was annihilated. Even his godhead shattered. At this point, the illusory Sun Sect master wasn't deliberately flattering. His tone was filled with heartfelt admiration and reverence. After all, he and Battle General Nanfeng were equal in strength. The two sides had fought for over 1,000 moves without a clear victor. On the other hand, Kenshin had killed Battle General Nanfeng in 3 moves and even shattered his godhead, completely annihilating Battle General Nanfeng. This undoubtedly showed that if Kenshin wanted to kill him, he would only need 3 moves. How could he not be in awe of such an unfathomable expert? End of chapter. Chapter 4284. After getting the answer he wanted, Ji Wuhan didn't say anything else. The two sides exchanged a few words in the sky. Then the illusory Sun Sect master and the elders welcomed Ji Tianqing into the illusory Sun-blessed land. The cleaning of the battlefield and the aftermath were naturally left to the 2 guardians and the elders. The 2nd and 6th elders accompanied the sect master and Kenshin's family back to the mountain gate of the illusory Sun Sect. They entered the illusory Sun Palace and sat down. Inside the majestic palace, the palace was spacious and bright. It was very luxurious. Behind the throne inlaid with divine gold and jade, the wide wall was engraved with the image of a burning sun hanging in the sky. However, the burning sun was somewhat hazy and showed many illusions which were quite meaningful. After everyone entered the main hall, the illusory Sun Sect master tactfully took the initiative to invite Ji Tianqing to sit on the main seat. Normally that was the exclusive throne of the illusory Sun Sect master. Logically speaking, even if a distinguished guest came as the host, he should sit on the throne. However, Kenshin was different. The illusory Sun Sect was about to pledge allegiance to Kenshin. In other words, Kenshin would be the master of this place from now on. It was understandable for him to sit on the throne. Although the illusory Sun Sect hadn't officially pledged allegiance, the illusory Sun Sect master and the elders had already regarded themselves as subordinates. After everyone sat down, the 2nd elder ordered the maids to bring spiritual tea and spiritual fruits. Then the 2 sides started to talk. Yun Yao had already told Ji Tianqing about the illusory Sun Sect's wishes and the situation of the other 4 forces. However, the illusory Sun Sect master still had to express to Ji Tianqing that the illusory Sun Sect was willing to pledge allegiance and help Kenshin eliminate the darkness and save the firmament land. After expressing illusory Sun Sect's admiration and loyalty to Sword God, illusory Sun Sect's sect master also praised the other 4 forces, praising them as loyal, righteous, and unyielding. Ji Tianqing knew that although the illusory Sun Sect and the other 4 forces weren't as exaggerated as the illusory Sun Sect master said, they were indeed very courageous. Compared to those factions that remained neutral and watched from the sidelines, these 5 factions were indeed trustworthy. As for those who had long been loyal to the Nebula God Emperor and the Celestial King, they were all on Ji Tianqing's list of targets to be eliminated. After the greetings were over, the prelude was laid out and it was time to get to the main topic. As soon as Ji Tianqing suggested that the illusory Sun Sect swear allegiance to him, the illusory Sun Sect master, who had long since been mentally prepared, agreed of his own accord. From the looks of it, he had been waiting for this day for a long time, and even seemed a little impatient. Ji Tianqing nodded slightly in satisfaction, then took out a jade slip and threw it to the illusory Sun Sect master. In front of everyone, the illusory Sun Sect master recited a pledge of nearly 1,000 words in a sonorous tone. Although the content of the oath was very strict, it was frightening. However, the illusory Sun Sect master was already mentally prepared, and he was quite shrewd, so he didn't reveal any abnormalities. The 2nd elder and the 6th elder had long heard of the rumors, and knew that Kenshin's heavenly oath was very terrifying. After hearing the contents of the oath with their own ears, they knew that the rumors were true, and they were sweating for the sect master in their hearts. However, the illusory Sun Sect master's expression didn't change, and he finished reciting the heavenly oath without stopping. Then his entire body lit up with a 5-colored divine light, and a trace of Tao appeared above his head. In the sky above the illusory Sun Sect's mountain gate, a deafening roar of thunder resounded. The 2 elders were astonished by such a strange phenomenon. The illusory Sun Sect master was enveloped by the vast heavenly might, and he couldn't help but feel fear in his heart. He could clearly feel that after the heavenly oath was made, there seemed to be an eye of the heavens that was constantly monitoring him. This mysterious and terrifying feeling made him respect Kenshin even more. Originally, it wasn't enough for the illusory Sun Sect Master to swear allegiance, and the Vice Sect Master had to swear as well. However, the illusory Sun Sect had removed the position of Vice Sect Master 10,000 years ago, and there had been no Vice Sect Master since then. Ji Tianxing also couldn't let the two guardians who were still dealing with the aftermath rush back to swear allegiance, so he put away the jade slip and ended this matter. A moment later, the thunder in the sky dissipated, and the divine light and Tao around the illusory Sun Sect Master disappeared. His expression returned to normal and he smiled again, formally bowing to Ji Tianxing as a subordinate. Although swearing allegiance was a little scary and he was very afraid in his heart. However, after swearing allegiance, the illusory Sun Sect Master was completely at ease, and he no longer felt any pressure. That was because he had already collected information about Kenshin's unification of the Boundless Heaven Continent and Reincarnation Island. He found a pattern. Whether it was the Boundless Heaven Continent or Reincarnation Island, the ancient clans that took the lead to swear allegiance to Kenshin would receive Kenshin's trust and respect as long as they performed well. When Kenshin left, he would appoint the clan leader to take control of the continent in his place. Just like the Celestial King under the Nebula God Emperor, they sat on the entire continent and held the power of life and death in their hands. They were incomparably noble. And this was the first time Kenshin had shown himself since coming to the Boundless Heaven Continent. The illusory Sun Sect also became the first force to swear allegiance to Kenshin. The illusory Sun Sect Master asked himself, whether it was in front of Kenshin's wife or Kenshin, he performed very well. In the future, as long as he didn't make any mistakes, he would definitely receive Kenshin's trust and respect. In the future, when Kenshin unifies the Boundless Heaven Continent and settles the overall situation. Thinking of this, the illusory Sun Sect Master was secretly excited and felt very fortunate. Thinking about it seriously, he seemed to have to thank the Celestial King and General Nanfeng. If the Celestial King hadn't been so aggressive and General Nanfeng hadn't led the army to attack, Madame Kenshin wouldn't have rushed over and Kenshin wouldn't have helped. Perhaps, Kenshin would have chosen a clan or force that was closer to him. Next, Ji Tianxing asked the illusory Sun Sect Master when the other 4 clan leaders, Sect Masters, and Pavilion Masters would arrive at the illusory Sun Blessed Land. The illusory Sun Sect Master was a smart person. He immediately understood Kenshin's unspoken words. For the next period of time, Kenshin would stay in the illusory Sun Sect and wait for the 4 clan leaders and sect masters to arrive. As the saying goes, the pavilion closest to the water enjoys the moonlight first. This was definitely good news for the illusory Sun Sect. The illusory Sun Sect Master was even more surprised and quickly answered, "Sir, the distance between the 4 forces is different. The closest one will arrive in 5 days and the furthest one will take 10 days. He was very smart. He used distance to distinguish the time, and didn't use fast or slow to describe it. This way, Kenshin wouldn't feel that the leaders of the 4 forces had different speeds and that their attitudes weren't sincere. Although this was a very small detail that ordinary people wouldn't care about. But when Ji Tianxing noticed this detail and recalled the many scenes after he met the illusory Sun Sect Master, a gratified expression appeared on his face. In all fairness, he didn't dislike the illusory Sun Sect Master, who was a wily old fox that knew when to advance and when to retreat. The most important thing was that the illusory Sun Sect Master wasn't selfish. He didn't belittle and slander the other forces for the sake of the illusory Sun Sect's interests. On the contrary, the illusory Sun Sect Master would always try his best to protect the other 4 forces. Whether the illusory Sun Sect Master was like this or just pretending, this proved that he was worthy of great responsibility. Chapter 4285. After finishing the business, the illusory Sun Sect Master personally arranged a residence for Ji Tianxing's family. Originally, he had wanted to show his respect and courtesy to Kenshin, so he had prepared the most luxurious palace for them. However, Ji Tianxing said that the residence that the illusory Sun Sect Master had arranged for Yunyao and Ji Wuhan was very good, so he also wanted to live in that residence. The illusory Sun Sect Master tried to persuade him again, but in the end he still followed Ji Tianxing's wishes and the matter was decided. Then the 6th elder followed Ji Tianxing's family to the residence to rest. The illusory Sun Sect Master calmed his excitement and still had to deal with various affairs. From now on, he considered himself the most loyal subordinate of Kenshin's Firmament Continent branch. This was because he was worried that after Kenshin unified the Firmament Continent and left, he would most likely be the one in charge of the Firmament Continent. Therefore, while he was filled with anticipation and pride, he also felt a sense of responsibility and mission. Even when considering matters, he had to be more cautious and comprehensive, so that he could help Kenshin solve his problems. Therefore, the first thing he did was to take out 4 communication jade slips and send messages to the other 4 forces patriarchs, sect masters and pavilion masters, explaining the situation. There were too many people involved in today's battle, and the situation was too chaotic and complicated. Even though Commander Nan Feng and his 10,000-strong army had been annihilated, not a single person was left alive. However, before the army was destroyed, some soldiers risked their lives to send out messages and spread the news of Kenshin's appearance. He believed that the Celestial King should have received the report by now, and the relevant news would spread within 2 days. In addition, Kenshin had appeared openly in the battle, so he obviously had no intention of hiding his whereabouts or identity. Since that was the case, there was no need to keep it a secret. The Illusory Sun Sect Master directly told the 4 patriarchs, sect masters, and pavilion masters that Lord Kenshin had arrived at the Illusory Sun Blessed Land today and cooperated with the Illusory Sun Sect to annihilate Commander Nanfeng's troops. Right now, Kenshin has already settled down in the Illusory Sun Sect. Patriarchs, sect masters and pavilion masters, please hurry over and don't waste any time. After sending the message, the Illusory Sun Sect Master went to inspect the sect, instructing the elders, deacons and disciples to carry out various tasks. After all, the battle had just ended and the battlefield had not been cleaned up yet. It would take time to restore it to its original state. Especially the defensive array of Illusory Sun Blessed Land, which had to be repaired and reinforced, which would take a lot of time and money. The Illusory Sun Sect Master quickly entered a busy state. He focused on arranging the various tasks and personally supervising and inspecting. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes. It couldn't be helped. Kenshin and his family lived in Illusory Sun Blessed Land. Illusory Sun Sect Master didn't want any accidents to happen, which would affect Kenshin's perception and judgment of him. 6 hours later, the battlefield was cleaned up and all the spoils were collected. The Illusory Sun Sect Master ordered the elders, deacons and disciples to continue repairing the battlefield. He was preparing to bring the spoils of war to Lord Kenshin. However, he hadn't walked far when he suddenly thought of a problem. These spoils of war had just been collected and were still in a very messy state. They hadn't been sorted out. If he just handed them over to Lord Kenshin, wouldn't that be wasting Lord Kenshin's time to sort them out one by one? As Lord Kenshin's trusted aide, how could he make such a low-level mistake and cause trouble for Lord Kenshin? The starting point of doing things had to be convenient for Lord Kenshin. Thus, the Illusory Sun Sect Master hurriedly summoned 4 deacons to help him sort out the numerous spoils of war. If it was in the past, he would at most instruct the 4 deacons to handle this matter. He definitely wouldn't do it himself. However, it was different now. He had to set a good example. Although this kind of tedious matter was very tiring and mentally taxing. Half a day later, the Illusory Sun Sect Master and the 4 deacons had successfully sorted out the spoils of war and felt a sense of accomplishment. He put the numerous spoils of war into 3 different spatial rings before going to see Kenshin. In the elegant and unique courtyard, the Illusory Sun Sect Master saw Ji Tianxing at the stone table under the tree and presented the 3 spatial rings to him. These 3 spatial rings contained a total of nearly 8 trillion worth of cultivation resources. There were also many strange treasures and divine artifacts whose value was hard to estimate for the time being, so they weren't included. After the Illusory Sun Sect Master presented the spoils of war, he was able to very fluently and accurately report the amounts of various resources. Ji Tianxing was very satisfied with his ability and accepted the spoils of war. Even though he was already rich and didn't lack any cultivation resources, he still accepted the spoils of war. However, he still accepted these spoils of war and prepared to carefully select them. Then he would take out a portion of cultivation resources to reward the Illusory Sun Sect. After all, only the Illusory Sun Sect had participated in this battle, and the Illusory Sun Sect had paid a certain price for it. The victory was certainly gratifying. If they could receive his praise and rewards, the disciples of the Illusory Sun Sect would be even happier, and they would worship and trust him even more. This was the simplest way to win people's hearts. wasn't worth mentioning at all. In the next few days, the illusory sun sect was calm and peaceful, and the atmosphere was filled with excitement and longing. The disciples who were heavily injured were already in seclusion to heal their wounds. The disciples who were lightly injured and could still move obeyed the orders of the sect master and the elders and carried out various tasks. In just 3 days, the ruins at the entrance of the Blessed Land were restored to its original state, and the defensive formation was also repaired. At this time, the news that Kenshin had appeared in the firmament continent and led the illusory sun sect to annihilate Commander Nanfeng's troops had also spread throughout the firmament continent. In the past few months, the seemingly peaceful firmament continent had actually been paying attention and anticipating when Kenshin would arrive and when he would take action. Now the news finally broke out and immediately spread throughout the firmament continent. Countless experts and forces knew about it. As the news spread rapidly, more and more regions, empires and civilians received this shocking news. Everyone knew that Kenshin's appearance in the firmament continent was a signal that he was going to take over the firmament continent. Billions of civilians finally received rain after a long drought. The savior and hope they had been waiting for had finally arrived. They were all very excited and excitedly discussed this matter and spread the news. As for the leaders of the regions, empires and leaders of the top forces, they all had mixed feelings. Everyone was well aware of how powerful General Nanfeng was. Kenshin had just arrived in the firmament continent, and he had already acted so decisively and killed one of the Celestial King's valiant generals. He was extremely aggressive and domineering. This made the nobles and experts worried about what would happen next. At the same time, they began to think and weigh their futures and lives calmly. End of chapter. Chapter 4286. Ji Tianxing stayed in illusory sun-blessed land and waited for the leaders of the other 4 forces to arrive. The news had already spread and was known by countless forces and powerhouses. The attitude and confidence he displayed showed that he was confident that he could defeat Empyrean God King and Firmament Continent. He was exceptionally confident and domineering. Even if his whereabouts were exposed, he was not afraid that the Celestial King would take the opportunity to launch a sneak attack or carry out some other scheme. This also invisibly increased the courage and confidence of the people of the firmament mainland. This brought a great deal of pressure and worry to the leaders of the nobles and top forces. Although there was no news that the Celestial King had received the news and no one knew how the Celestial King would react. But it didn't take a genius to figure out that the Empyrean God King must have known about this before the news spread. Moreover, with the Celestial King's personality, he would definitely fly into a rage out of humiliation. He would hate the Kenshin to the core, but he would also be worried and fearful. As for what he would do next and how he would react, they could only wait and see. He Ku Ji Wushuang, Chao Qingyu, Bai Feng, Nangong Ni Huang and the others were still running around the firmament mainland. They continued to carry out their missions and travel through different regions to investigate and report to Ji Tianxing. Although they were scattered all over the firmament mainland, they received the news almost on the same day that the Kenshin had annihilated Commander Nanfeng's troops. When they heard the good news, they felt proud and optimistic about the upcoming situation. Originally, they thought that the Kenshin had already revealed their whereabouts. Next, the Kenshin would definitely summon them to illusory sun-blessed land to carry out the subsequent missions and battles. However, to their surprise, the Kenshin did not summon them back. Instead, he sent them a message and asked them to gather in groups of 2s and 3s. If they gathered together, their combat power would undoubtedly be stronger and their safety would be guaranteed. The smarter ones understood that the Kenshin probably had a new mission for them. Sure enough, 3 days later, when they all gathered together and formed 8 teams, Ji Tianxing issued a new order. Not only did they have to investigate the various regions, but they also had to do something more important. That was to sneak into the domain chief's manor. If the domain chief was present, they would capture him and force him to swear a simplified version of the heavenly oath to pledge loyalty to Kenshin. If the domain chief was not present, they would have to find ways to destroy the domain chief's manor and create chaos and conflict. In short, the Kenshin had already publicly announced their whereabouts and declared war on the Celestial King. There was no way they would give the Celestial King a breather and allow him to deal with the situation calmly. Letting his followers go around subduing the area masters who were left behind to guard the area and destroy the areas where there was no power. Although this could not directly harm the Celestial King's power, it could still play a role in restraining him. After Ji Ku and his followers received the order, they quickly took action. Every few days, the 8 small groups of followers would frequently send back news of victory. In various regions of the firmament mainland, area masters who were left behind to guard the area were constantly subdued and forced to swear allegiance to the Kenshin. More news of victory was that the domain chief's manor had been stirred up into a mess by his followers with all kinds of tricks. When the area masters who stayed in Heaven Capital received the news that there was a big problem in their home base, they were all flustered and worried like ants on a hot pan. There was no other way. This was the common problem of every area master. They had to be loyal to the Celestial King and carry out the Celestial King's orders, but they were more concerned about their own territories and cave residences. Hearing the bad news, every day there would be area masters who could not keep their cool and went to ask the Celestial King for instructions. Although those anxious area masters were eventually suppressed by the Celestial King and could only stay in Heaven Capital obediently. However, the Celestial King was distracted and wasted a lot of time. His mood also became more irritable. Those area masters who were forcibly suppressed and forced back did not dare to resist on the surface, but they were resentful in their hearts. In the eyes of some area masters, the Celestial King only cared about the safety of himself and Heaven Capital, and did not care about their territories and foundations at all. What's more, it was inferred that the Celestial King's attitude was to use them as cannon fodder. The discord between the ruler and his subjects was happening, but the Celestial King did not care about it. He gathered many trusted generals and military counselors to discuss and study various countermeasures. He also had to arrange the troops and make various deployments as soon as possible. In short, Empyrean God King and his subordinates felt a great deal of pressure. However, they did not dare to act rashly. The safest way was to strengthen the defense and see what Kenshin's next plan was. Of course, some young and aggressive generals did not agree with the Celestial King's decision and raised objections. They thought that Kenshin had just arrived in the firmament mainland. Although he had killed General Nan Feng and 10,000 troops in the first battle, which had greatly increased his reputation, his foundation was still weak. Currently, he had only subdued the Fantasy Sun sect and did not have any other forces to support him. They suggested to the Celestial King that they must use this opportunity to besiege Kenshin and the Fantasy Sun sect. They must nip the crisis in the bud before Kenshin's forces were formed. Only then would they have a chance of survival. If they waited for Kenshin to subdue the various ancient clans and top forces, and when he had more and more elite soldiers under his command, they would definitely lose. Logically speaking, these young generals' ideas were not wrong. Their suggestions were reasonable and had the conditions to be implemented. How could the Celestial King not understand this logic and had not thought of such a plan? However, the biggest problem with this proposal was that it was too radical and too risky. This was equivalent to the Celestial King using all his forces to fight Kenshin as soon as Kenshin appeared in the firmament mainland. This battle would determine victory and defeat as well as life and death. Although the Celestial King's side had an absolute advantage and had a high chance of winning. However, their opponent was Kenshin, a guy who was good at creating miracles and was unfathomably powerful. The Celestial King had no confidence that he could kill Kenshin in a decisive battle. If he used all his forces and only eradicated the Fantasy Sun sect, but failed to kill Kenshin or let Kenshin escape, the consequences would be unimaginable. What if Kenshin did not fight him head-on, but used his super strength to assassinate his generals and experts one by one? Then he could only hide in Heaven Capital, and the entire firmament mainland would fall into chaos and collapse. When the Celestial King told the young generals this reason, they all fell silent. There were still some who did not give up and continued to persuade him that they did not need to go all out. They could send half of their forces to besiege Kenshin and the Fantasy Sun sect, and leave the other half to guard Heaven Capital. This proposal immediately caused many generals to roll their eyes. The Celestial King was so angry that he sneered and said with a dark face, "Even if we use all our forces, we may not be able to kill Kenshin, let alone half of our forces?" End of chapter. Chapter 4287. It was obvious that the Celestial King was responsible for the safety of the entire firmament land. He could not take the risk. To be safe, he decided to strengthen the defense of Heaven Capital and wait for Kenshin's next move. Even when he received reports from various sources that the Sword God was recruiting troops and buying horses, gathering subordinates everywhere to build his own forces, he could only ignore it. because he knew that even if he destroyed all the forces under Kenshin, as long as Kenshin was not killed, everything would be in vain. The only way to defeat Kenshin was to kill Kenshin. When the young generals heard the Celestial King's decision, no matter how unwilling they could only swallow it and bow to show that they would follow the order. Fortunately, the Celestial King was not someone who would swallow his anger. The death of General Nanfeng and his 10,000 troops was a big blow to him. It was also a slap to his face by Kenshin, causing his reputation to fall. Even though he did not dare to mobilize his forces to attack the Fantasy Sun sect directly and start a decisive battle with Kenshin, he still decided to fight back. Spies had heard that the leaders, masters and cabinet masters of the other four forces were rushing to the Fantasy Sun Blessed Land to meet with Kenshin. Obviously, the four forces like the Fantasy Sun sect could not wait to join Kenshin. Since that was the case, how could the Celestial King let them go? He had to take advantage of the fact that the four leaders, masters and cabinet masters were not around and send a large number of troops to attack the Fantasy Sun Blessed Land. Therefore, the Celestial King chose 8 powerful heavenly generals on the spot. Each of them led 30 immortal kings and 9,000 elite soldiers to attack the four forces. Among the 8 heavenly generals who were named, 5 of them were the young generals who made the suggestion just now. They were depressed and thought that there was no war to fight and they could only stay in Heaven Capital. Now that they suddenly received the Celestial King's order, they were full of joy and agreed without hesitation. They were very excited and full of expectations. After bowing to the Celestial King and acknowledging his command, they left the Great Council Hall and went to prepare for battle. Since it was a sneak attack, the 8 god generals had split into 4 groups. Naturally, they had to take the divine battleships and rush to the 4 factions. From the moment they left Tiandu, they had to hide their whereabouts and news and quietly rush to their destination. Even if they arrived at their destination, they couldn't directly launch an attack and forcefully break into the cave abodes of the various forces. They also had to use some schemes and tricks according to the actual situation, trying their best to catch all the targets in one fell swoop without anyone noticing. Even though this was a temporary order from the Celestial King, the 8 heavenly generals had yet to come up with a plan. However, it would still take them a few days to reach their destination, which was enough time for them to slowly come up with a plan. A day later, the patriarch of the ancient clan closest to the Illusory Sun sect arrived at Illusory Sun Blessed Land with 2 elders. The bearded man who had rushed over in a hurry was the clan leader of the Li clan, Li Yuan, a LV9 Divine King Realm expert. The 2 elders who followed him to Illusory Sun Blessed Land were the 2nd elder and the 3rd elder. Their status and strength were not ordinary. Li Yuan brought the 2 elders and rushed to meet Kenshin in such a hurry. It was enough to see his sincerity in pledging his loyalty. When Li Yuan and the 2 elders entered Illusory Sun Blessed Land, they were personally received by the Illusory Sun Sect Master. Li Yuan and the Illusory Sun Sect Master had known each other for 10,000 years and had a good relationship. The 2 exchanged greetings for a while. Li Yuan didn't even take a sip of tea and directly stated his purpose of coming. He wanted to meet Kenshin as soon as possible. The Illusory Sun Sect Master naturally understood his feelings. He also hoped that Li Yuan could represent the Li clan and submit to Kenshin as soon as possible. However, the Illusory Sun Sect Master had carefully studied Kenshin's deeds during this period. Especially the process of Kenshin conquering the boundless Heaven Continent and Reincarnation Island 2 years ago, he had carefully studied it. With his meticulousness and caution, it wasn't difficult to find a pattern. Whenever Kenshin conquered the leaders of several factions at the same time, he would never meet with one of them alone. Kenshin would always wait until all the factions that he wanted to pledge his loyalty to arrived before meeting them together and carrying out the ceremony of swearing allegiance. From this detail, the Illusory Sun Sect Master saw Kenshin's breadth of mind and fairness. He was deeply impressed. At the same time, he also understood that this was one of Kenshin's charms. Perhaps the leaders of many forces would admire and worship the sword god even more because of this. Thus, when Li Yuan mentioned that he wanted to meet Kenshin, the Illusory Sun Sect Master immediately became vigilant. He definitely couldn't agree to Li Yuan's request. He immediately brought Li Yuan to meet Kenshin. Kenshin most likely wouldn't meet Li Yuan and would have a bad impression of him. Thus, the Illusory Sun Sect Master patiently persuaded Li Yuan to stay in Illusory Sun Blessed Land and wait patiently for a few days. At the very least, it would be fairer for everyone to meet when the other three patriarchs, sect masters and pavilion masters arrived. Otherwise, if Li Yuan met Kenshin first, the other three leaders would definitely have a knot in their hearts even if they didn't say anything. They might guess that Li Yuan had negotiated some conditions with Kenshin and asked for some benefits. The Illusory Sun sect master used a more tactful tone to explain this to Li Yuan. However, Li Yuan was a boorish person who wasn't good at scheming. He didn't listen to the Illusory Sun sect master's advice and felt it was very strange. He asked Illusory Sun sect master, "I came all the way here and have already arrived at Illusory Sun Blessed Land. You still want me to stay here and pay a visit to Lord Kenshin in a few days? Lord Kenshin is clearly in your sect. Even if I shout, he'll be alerted. Aren't you wasting time? Besides, we're all the same. We just want to swear allegiance to Lord Kenshin as soon as possible. When did we think about negotiating conditions or asking for benefits? Those people on the Boundless Heaven continent and Reincarnation Island who are loyal to Lord Kenshin, have they been treated badly?" Li Yuan's words refuted the Illusory Sun sect master speechlessly. In the end, the Illusory Sun sect master couldn't stand Li Yuan's coaxing and pestering. He was also worried that this brainless guy would really run to the sect and shout, disturbing Kenshin. In that case, not only would Li Yuan be unlucky, but he would also be implicated. In desperation, the Illusory Sun sect master could only calm Li Yuan down and say that this matter couldn't be reckless. He asked Li Yuan to wait patiently for a while. He would personally ask Kenshin for instructions and see what Kenshin would say. Since it was up to Kenshin to decide whether to meet or not, Li Yuan had nothing to say. He could only nod in agreement and sit in the main hall, drinking tea and waiting. The Illusory Sun sect master walked out of the main hall with a wry smile and personally rushed to Kenshin's residence to report the situation. This wasn't his original intention. It was all forced by that boorish Li Yuan. He was already mentally prepared to be reprimanded by Kenshin or punished by Kenshin. Chapter 4288. Illusory Sun Sect, on top of a lonely peak, in a simple and elegant courtyard. Sixth Elder personally came to Kenshin and Madame Kenshin's room. Her expression and eyes were a little nervous and her posture was cautious. Although she didn't know what Lord Kenshin and Madame were doing in the room without showing up for a few days. But she thought that it definitely had nothing to do with what mortals were thinking. Kenshin and his wife were definitely cultivating. Even if they weren't cultivating, they were most likely discussing the Tao. But now wasn't the time to think about this. Sixth Elder calmed her mind and took a deep breath. Only then did she muster up the courage to shout, "Lord Kenshin, our sect master has something to discuss with you." After shouting, she quietly stood outside the door, anxiously waiting for Kenshin's response. Although the sect master didn't say why he was looking for Kenshin. But after observing the sect master's expression, she also felt that disturbing Kenshin at this time was likely to offend Kenshin and his wife. However, the sect master's orders were hard to disobey. Even if Kenshin angrily scolded her, she could only accept it. 3 short breaths of time, but it felt as long as 6 hours. Finally, Kenshin's voice came from the room. It was calm and gentle, instantly making Sixth Elder's hanging heart fall back into her stomach. "Let him wait in the study." Sixth Elder was full of joy. She hurriedly said yes, then turned and left to report the result to the sect master. Illusory Sun Sect's sect master was secretly relieved when he learned that Kenshin was willing to see him. Although letting Li Yuan meet Kenshin might not necessarily get Kenshin's permission. But for now it seemed that he had taken the first step to success. Feeling nervous and expectant, Illusory Sun Sect's sect master went to the study to wait. Not long after, Kenshin, dressed in a white robe and wearing a jade crown, entered the study. Illusory Sun Sect's sect master hurriedly stood up and bowed. Kenshin waved his hand, indicating that he didn't need to be so polite, and sat down on the armchair. "You came to see this seat at this time because the leaders of the 4 factions have arrived?" Ji Tianxing didn't waste any time and went straight to the point with his question. The master of the Illusory Sun sect quivered and hurriedly bowed, saying, "My lord is wise." "That is indeed the case." Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and said, "The closest tribe to this place is the Li clan. Their leader is called Li Yuan, right? If I remember correctly, Li Yuan's personality is rather boorish and straightforward. Did he ask you to find me so that you can see me as soon as possible?" Hearing Ji Tianxing's words, Illusory Sun sect master was quite impressed in his heart and hurriedly nodded and said, Your Excellency, the situation is exactly so. That Li Yuan is impatient and straightforward, but he is not a bad person. Please don't blame him, my lord. Illusory Sun sect master admired Kenshin's deduction ability, but he couldn't tell what the other party's attitude was, so he defended Li Yuan. This way, even if Kenshin was angry and wanted to reprimand or scold Li Yuan, it should be a little lighter. Unexpectedly, Kenshin didn't frown, show an unhappy expression, and then reprimand him as Illusory Sun sect master had predicted. Kenshin just raised his eyebrows, thought for a moment and then nodded. They bring him to see me. Ji Tianxing's expression was indifferent as he said this in a calm tone. Illusory Sun sect master was stunned on the spot, a little dumbfounded, thinking that he had misheard. He couldn't believe that not only was Kenshin not angry, but he also agreed to Li Yuan's request. This wasn't right. When Kenshin subdued the Boundless Heaven Continent and Reincarnation Island, didn't he meet with many leaders at the same time? He knew that the patriarchs, sect masters and pavilion masters of the other three forces would arrive one after another in the next few days. How could he meet with Li Yuan first? For a moment, Illusory Sun sect master was stunned on the spot and lost his mind. He suddenly found that the rules he discovered from carefully studying Kenshin's deeds and those details seemed to be useless. Kenshin's style of doing things really made people unable to fathom. At this time, Ji Tianxing saw that Illusory Sun sect master was stunned. He raised his eyebrows and asked, "Is there a problem?" Only then did Illusory Sun sect master come back to his senses and hurriedly shook his head and said, "No. Of course there's no problem. This subordinate is just happy for Li Yuan. Many thanks, Your Excellency." With Ji Tianxing's wisdom, how could he possibly not see through Illusory Sun sect master's abnormality? He immediately guessed Illusory Sun sect master's thoughts. A hint of a smile appeared at the corners of his mouth and he asked, "Do you feel very surprised, very surprised? You originally thought that this seat won't meet Li Yuan today and will definitely wait until the other three patriarchs, sect masters and pavilion masters all arrive, then meet them together? Just like how this seat subdued the Boundless Heaven Continent and Reincarnation Island previously. Only this way of doing things appears fair and just." Illusory Sun sect master's thoughts were completely guessed by Ji Tianxing. This made Illusory Sun sect master more and more shocked. At the same time, he was also somewhat ashamed and could only smile embarrassedly. "Your Excellency's wisdom is as deep as the sea and as deep as the sea. This subordinate really admires you." Ji Tianxing's smile was still at the corner of his mouth. He continued to ask, "Do you not understand why this seat changed the previous rules and is willing to meet Li Yuan?" Illusory Sun sect master did have this question, but if Kenshin didn't say it out loud he wouldn't ask rashly. He would only ponder about it in private. Since Kenshin took the initiative to ask, he certainly couldn't deny it. He smiled and said, "This subordinate is slow-witted. Please enlighten me, Your Excellency." Ji Tianxing put away his smile and said earnestly, "Before I arrived at the Firmament Continent, this continent was already in a state of panic and every bush and tree was an enemy. Celestial King had long been mentally prepared. He even gathered all the troops and strictly defended. Therefore when General Nanfeng attacked the illusory sun-blessed land, this seat directly showed up and didn't hide my tracks. Because even if this seat hid my tracks it would be useless. As long as the illusory sun sect is safe and General Nanfeng and his 10,000 troops are killed, the Celestial King will be sure that this seat did it. Not only him but all the powerhouses and forces in the Firmament Continent will be able to guess." The illusory sun sect master nodded to show that he understood and continued to listen. Ji Tianxing continued to explain, "Since this seat showed up openly, the Celestial King must be very anxious and worried. There are only two choices in front of him. One is to attack the illusory sun-blessed land with all his strength and try to kill this seat before this seat can gather his forces. The other is to bide his time and continue to strengthen the defense and wait for the final battle. However, the death of General Nanfeng and his 10,000 troops is a heavy loss to the Celestial King, and he has lost all his face. With his temperament he would definitely not swallow this humiliation. He would definitely think of a way to retaliate and turn the tables. Only then would he be able to regain his prestige. If he doesn't dare to attack the illusory sun sect and fight with this seat, then guess who he will attack?" Hearing this, the illusory sun sect master was stunned. Then his body shook and his eyes widened. Li Clan, Fengshuan Clan, Yanguang Sect and Shifang Pavilion. Celestial King will attack these 4 forces. Your Excellency is wise. This subordinate understands. Chapter 4289. The master of the Illusory Sun sect was a smart man. Ji Tianxing gave him a little hint and he immediately understood the reason. That's why my lord was able to guess Empyrean God King's next move with unparalleled wisdom. You guessed that the 4 forces were in danger, so you didn't stick to the old rules and didn't waste time. You met Li Yuan today. After the Li tribe swore their loyalty, you asked Li Yuan to leave and return to the Li tribe as soon as possible to prevent the Celestial King's sneak attack. Am I right? The master of the Illusory Sun sect was not only smart, but also able to infer many things from one case. Ji Tianxing showed a gratified smile and nodded slightly. Yes, your guess is completely correct. But these are all my guesses. Currently there is no definite news that the Celestial King sent troops to attack the 4 forces. Also, I have to wait here for the Fengshuan clan, the Yanguang sect and the Shifang Pavilion master, so I can't leave for now. Otherwise, I don't mind personally dealing with the Celestial King's army. The master of the Illusory Sun sect was a little shocked. It was from the bottom of his heart that he revered and worshipped Kenshin. He bowed deeply and said sincerely, "Thank you for your advice, sir. I've learned a lot." Ji Tianxing leaned on the armchair and looked out of the window with deep eyes. He said indifferently, "Ordinary people think that the final deciding factor of the battle between me and the Celestial King is the number of troops and experts. Or maybe it's my strength and methods. Actually, these aren't wrong, but they're not all right. The battle between me and the Celestial King is actually a competition of shrewdness and scheming. Whoever can predict the other's intentions and plan will have the upper hand. However, my strength and divine abilities are only enough to deter Empyrean God King from taking the risk." The master of the Illusory Sun sect listened carefully and showed a thoughtful expression. He had a new understanding from Kenshin's words. As far as he knew, Kenshin was incomparably noble, powerful and lofty. He would never waste words. And today Kenshin was willing to talk to him alone for so long. This was undoubtedly a sign of his high regard and expectations for him. The master of the Illusionary Sun sect had a hunch that Kenshin was deliberately cultivating him so that he could take over the power in the future and firmly control the firmament land. This made him inexplicably excited, but at the same time he also felt a deep sense of pride and pressure. Fortunately, after Ji Tianxing said everything that needed to be said, he didn't make a long speech and had the Illusory Sun sect master withdraw. The Illusory Sun sect master left with joy and excitement to pass on the good news to Li Yuan. Ji Tianxing sat in the study quietly flipping through ancient books. After waiting for about 15 minutes, the voice of the Illusory Sun sect master came from outside the study. Reporting to Lord Kenshin, the leader of the Li clan, Li Yuan is here. In fact, from the reception hall to Ji Tianxing's residence, it only took 100 breaths. The Illusory Sun sect master must have instructed Li Yuan to wait for 15 minutes. Ji Tianxing put down the ancient book in his hand and said in a calm and dignified tone, "Come in, all of you." If he only said "come in," the Illusory Sun sect master would definitely not enter the study and let Li Yuan go in alone to meet Kenshin. But Ji Tianxing said "come in," so he naturally led Li Yuan in. Li Yuan entered the study first with a heart full of longing and awe. He didn't dare to look at Kenshin's face and first bowed deeply and said in a respectful tone, "Subordinate Li Yuan greets Lord Kenshin." Well, another loyal subordinate who had long since made up his mind to be loyal to Kenshin. He hadn't even sworn his loyalty yet, but he already considered himself as a subordinate. The Illusory Sun sect master followed him into the study and silently closed the door. He stood aside and didn't interrupt. Ji Tianxing looked at Li Yuan and smiled. "Li Yuan, this isn't the first time you've met me. Why are you so reserved?" Indeed, when Kenshin roamed the God realm 1,000 years ago, he traveled across the 5 continents, visited many blessed lands and ancient clans, and sparred with countless prodigies. The Li clan was no exception. Ji Tianxing stayed in the Li clan for 10 days and defeated 2 of their geniuses. He had naturally met Li Yuan before and had interacted with him. In fact, back then the 2 of them didn't get along very well. The hot-tempered Li Yuan almost personally suppressed Kenshin. Later it was a few elders who stopped and persuaded Li Yuan to calm things down. It was also because of this that Li Yuan was determined to be loyal to Kenshin. At the same time, when he wanted to meet Kenshin, he was especially nervous and guilty. Now that Ji Tianqing had exposed this layer of relationship, Li Yuan didn't hide it anymore. He raised his head and smiled awkwardly. After seeing Ji Tianqing's appearance clearly, he realized that Kenshin seemed to be younger than before. His appearance and temperament had also changed slightly. Of course, he had heard of the legend of Kenshin coming back from the dead and returning to his peak. He wasn't surprised by this. Seeing Kenshin's smiling face, he couldn't help but scratch his head. He said even more awkwardly, "Lord Kenshin, I am a rash and impulsive man. I almost offended you back then. Please forgive my unintentional actions." Li Yuan's personality was clearly exposed the moment he spoke. Unlike the illusory Sun Sect's leader who was experienced and calm, he was obviously a simple, straightforward and rough man. Ji Tianqing naturally wouldn't bicker with him. He waved his hand and said with a smile, "Back then I took the initiative to visit and challenge the Li clan's prodigies. 2 of the Li clan's prodigies were defeated by my sword. The Li clan's face couldn't be maintained. As the clan leader, it's reasonable that you want to stand up for your disciples. Fortunately, the Li clan's elders were more reasonable. I have no enmity with the Li clan, so I stopped you. In short, there's no need to mention what happened back then. I won't take it to heart." If it was someone with complicated thoughts, they might not believe Ji Tianqing's words and would respond carefully. But Li Yuan's mind was simple. He immediately let out a sigh of relief and hurriedly bowed with a smile. Seeing his reaction, Ji Tianqing thought to himself, "This brute is still the same as back then. Although he's a little stupid, he's not annoying." In order not to waste time, Ji Tianqing didn't reminisce with Li Yuan. He directly took out a jade slip and handed it to him. "You know the rules. If there are no problems, let's begin." Seeing the jade slip, Li Yuan's eyes lit up. He chuckled and said, "I traveled hundreds of millions of miles and rushed here in a hurry for this. The sooner I finish the process, the more at ease I can feel." Finished speaking, he began to recite the heavenly oath according to the contents of the jade slip. Half an hour later, the oath of surrender was finished. The oath took effect and the familiar phenomenon appeared again. Ji Tianqing put away the jade slip and said to the relieved Li Yuan, "If there's nothing else, go back immediately and prepare for battle." But Li Yuan was dumbfounded.